I should have never gone on that camping trip. It was supposed to be a weekend to unwind, just me and the quiet of the wilderness. After months of working nonstop, I needed an escape. I picked a secluded spot deep in the woods, away from the usual hiking trails, where I wouldn't see another person for miles. That was the whole point, to be alone, to disconnect, to breathe fresh air. But looking back now, I realized just how foolish that decision was. The drive out there took longer than expected. The dirt roads leading to the trailhead were rough, winding through dense forest with no signs of civilization. By the time I parked and started my hike, the sun was already dipping low in the sky. I wasn't worried. I had my gear, plenty of supplies, and enough experience to handle a night in the woods. I camped alone before, but something about this place felt different. Maybe it was how quiet it was. The deeper I went, the more unnatural the silence became. No distant rustling, no birds chirping, no wind moving through the trees. Just my footsteps crunching leaves and the occasional snap of a twig under my boots. I tried to shake off the unease. It was just my mind playing tricks on me. I had read about this, how absolute silence in nature can feel wrong, how it can make you paranoid. By the time I reached my campsite, it was nearly dark. I found a clearing near a small stream, set up my tent, and got a fire going. The crackling flames gave me some comfort, and soon enough, I was starting to enjoy the isolation. I cooked dinner, listened to the distant sound of running water, and let the stress of daily life melt away. For a while, everything felt fine. But then, in the middle of the night, I woke up. First, I didn't know why. The fire had died down, leaving only glowing embers, and my tent was sealed shut. My first thought was that I had heard something, but there was nothing, just the same oppressive silence I had noticed earlier. No wind, no animals, nothing. I reached for my flashlight, and that's when I heard it. Faint rustling. Not far from my tent, something was moving through the brush. It wasn't the wind, it was deliberate, slow, careful. My chest tightened. I stayed completely still, listening, trying to convince myself it was just a deer or some small animal. But then the sound stopped. Whatever was out there, it was waiting, listening. I told myself not to panic. I dealt with wildlife before. I gripped the knife I kept by my sleeping bag, took a deep breath, and unzipped the tent just a little, just enough to peek outside. The fire's glow had faded, leaving the woods shrouded in darkness. I swept my flashlight across the trees, my heart hammering in my chest. Nothing, just trees, shadows, and the empty forest. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I stayed awake for hours, listening. Every so often, I thought I heard movement, just a whisper of sound, barely noticeable. But I never saw anything. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, the sun was rising. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe my brain had turned normal forest sounds into something more sinister. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I decided to pack up and move to a different spot, somewhere farther from the tree line, where I could see in all directions. The second night was worse. I built a bigger fire, hoping it would keep animals or whatever else was out there away. I forced myself to eat, even though my stomach was twisted in knots. As the hours passed, I started to relax again. The fire was warm, my tent was secure, and nothing had happened all day. I was probably just overreacting. And then, sometime past midnight, I woke up again. This time, there was no doubt. Something was outside my tent. The footsteps were slow, careful, circling. I stopped breathing. My hand tightened around my knife. My mind raced. Who was out there? Another camper? A lost hiker? A hunter? But deep down, I already knew the answer. This wasn't an accident. Whoever was out there had been watching me since I arrived. I forced myself to move as quietly as possible, reaching for my flashlight. My hands were shaking. I took a deep breath, then unzipped the tent just an inch, just enough to see. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, too far to make out details, but close enough that I knew they were looking right at me. I froze. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but I couldn't move. I couldn't think. The fire had burned low, barely illuminating their shape. They stood there for what felt like forever. Then, slowly, they turned and disappeared into the woods. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't even move until the sun came up. As soon as there was light, I packed my gear, moving as fast as I could. My hands were still shaking. My body felt ice cold. I didn't stop to eat, didn't stop to rest. I just kept going, pushing through the forest until I reached my car. When I finally locked the doors and started the engine, I felt like I could breathe again. But as I pulled away, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A figure, standing at the tree line, watching me leave. I didn't look back. I didn't stop driving. I didn't relax until I was miles away, back in civilization, surrounded by people and noise and safety. I don't know who they were. I don't know what they wanted. But I do know one thing. I will never go camping alone again. I always liked camping alone. I liked the silence, the peace of being away from everything. No cars, no people, no buzzing of electronics. Just me, a tent, and the sounds of the forest. It wasn't the smartest thing to do, I knew that, but I'd been doing it for years. I figured as long as I was careful, nothing bad would happen. This trip was no different. I drove out to a spot deep in the woods, farther than most people go. It was a place I found a couple of years back while hiking. It had a small clearing, a stream nearby for water, and a thick wall of trees that made it feel secluded. Perfect. I arrived in the late afternoon, parked my truck at the end of an old logging road, and hiked in. The air was cool, and the scent of pine and damp earth filled my nose. It felt good to be out here again. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and got everything in order before it got dark. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, I had a small fire going, a pot of water heating for coffee, and my sleeping bag laid out inside the tent. The first night was quiet. I sat by the fire, ate a simple meal, and listened to the wind in the trees. At one point, I heard rustling in the brush, probably a deer or a raccoon. Nothing unusual. Eventually, I put out the fire and climbed into my tent. I zipped myself up in my sleeping bag, listened to the distant hoot of an owl, and drifted off to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. It was dead silent, the kind of silence that feels wrong. No wind, no insects, nothing. Just heavy stillness. I lay there, eyes open in the dark, listening. Then I heard it. A soft sound, faint but definitely there. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving through the trees just beyond my camp. My heart pounded in my chest. I held my breath, trying to listen, trying to figure out what it was. A bear? No, bears don't move like that. Person? Out here? I reached for my flashlight but hesitated. If it was an animal, I didn't want to spook it. If it was a person, well, I wasn't sure I wanted to let them know I was awake. The footsteps stopped. I waited. Minutes passed. Nothing. I told myself it was just my imagination, just the forest playing tricks on me. Eventually, I fell back asleep. The next morning, everything seemed normal. Birds were chirping, the air was fresh, and the fear from the night before felt distant, almost silly. I made breakfast, packed a small bag, and went for a hike. I followed the stream for a while, enjoying the quiet. But something felt off. It was subtle, an unease that sat in my gut. Maybe it was just lingering nerves from last night. As I made my way back to camp, I noticed something. Footprints. Not mine. They were in the dirt, near my tent. They weren't fresh, but they hadn't been there yesterday. I crouched down, examining them. Boots. Someone had been here while I was out hiking. I stood up, looking around, scanning the trees. Nothing. I told myself it was probably a hunter or another camper passing through. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I went back to my tent, checked my gear. Nothing was missing, nothing had been disturbed, but someone had been here. I made the decision to stay one more night, but to keep my knife and flashlight within reach. That night, I didn't sleep well. Every sound made me tense. I kept the fire going longer than usual, the flickering light making me feel a little safer. But eventually, I had to let it die down and crawl into my tent. I lay there in the dark, listening, waiting. Then, sometime past midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps, closer this time. Not in the trees, but inside my camp. My breath caught in my throat. I gripped my knife tight, my other hand on my flashlight. I listened, barely breathing. The footsteps moved around the tent, slow and careful. Then silence. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, my heart pounding. I wanted to check, to shine my light, but fear kept me frozen. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight filtered through the fabric of my tent. I climbed out, heart still pounding. My camp looked normal, but then I saw it. Footprints, again, circling my tent. And something else. A single boot print, pressed deep into the dirt, just outside my tent's entrance. Whoever it was had been standing there, inches from me, just on the other side of the fabric. Watching, I packed up immediately. I didn't bother eating. I shoved my gear into my pack, put out the fire, and hiked back to my truck. The whole time I felt exposed, vulnerable. I kept checking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone watching me from the trees. But I saw nothing, just the empty forest. When I finally reached my truck, I tossed my gear into the back, locked the doors, and started the engine. I drove out of there as fast as I could, my hands gripping the wheel so tight they hurt. I never went back to that spot, never camped alone again. I don't know who was out there that night, what they wanted, or why they never made a move. But I do know one thing. They were there, and they were watching. I never liked the idea of staying in a cabin alone, but I needed the isolation. The past few months had been exhausting. Work, people, noise. I wanted to shut it all out. When my coworker told me about a remote cabin in the woods he owned but rarely used, I figured it was perfect. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, no neighbors. Just me, the woods, and silence. The drive took longer than expected. The roads got narrower the deeper I went into the forest. I had downloaded a map beforehand, but it wasn't very detailed. Eventually, I found the turnoff, a barely visible dirt path that wound through the trees. My tires crunched over gravel as I crept forward. The sun was already starting to set, casting long shadows between the trees. When I finally reached the cabin, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was smaller than I expected, but it looked solid, dark wooden walls, a steep roof, and a porch with a single rocking chair. The forest pressed in from all sides, dense and silent. I killed the engine and stepped out. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of damp earth and pine. I grabbed my bag from the trunk, locked the car out of habit, and climbed the 3 wooden steps to the front door. The key my coworker gave me turned smoothly in the lock, and the door creaked as it swung open. Inside, the cabin was simple. A small kitchen to the left, a living area with a couch and a fireplace to the right, and a hallway leading to a bedroom and bathroom. The walls were lined with old wooden planks, and the floor creaked under my boots. There was no electricity, just a few gas lamps and a wood-burning stove. I set my bag down on the couch and took a deep breath. It was quiet, too quiet. I was used to the hum of city life, the distant sounds of traffic, voices, music. Here, the silence felt heavy, like a presence of its own. I shook it off and got to work. I found a stack of firewood by the door and got a fire going in the stove. The warmth helped push back the creeping cold that settled in as night fell. I lit a few lamps, their flickering light casting long shadows on the walls. After a quick meal of canned soup, I sat in the rocking chair on the porch, staring out into the darkness. The trees stood tall and unmoving, their black forms blending together. Every now and then, I heard a rustle, an animal moving through the undergrowth, maybe a deer. I told myself it was nothing. The first night was uneventful, but my sleep was restless. I woke up multiple times, heart pounding, unsure why. Each time, I listened, straining to hear something, anything, but there was nothing. Just the wind, the crackling fire, the distant hoot of an owl. The second day, I spent my time exploring. I found a narrow trail behind the cabin, leading deeper into the woods. I followed it for a while, taking in the towering trees, the thick carpet of fallen leaves. I found an old hunting blind, its wood rotting, half collapsed. I turned back when the sky started to darken, but something felt off, like I wasn't alone, like something was just out of sight, watching. I told myself it was paranoia, that I wasn't used to being this isolated. That night, I woke up again, but this time I heard something, a soft crunch outside. Footsteps. I held my breath, listening. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The sound came again, slow, deliberate. Someone or something was walking outside the cabin. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, moving toward the window. The fire had burned low, and the room was mostly dark. I peeked through the curtain. Nothing. The trees swayed slightly in the wind, but there was no sign of movement. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. I barely slept the rest of the night. By the third day, I was on edge. Every noise made me jump. The wind through the trees, the creaking of the cabin, even my own footsteps. That evening, I decided to stay inside. I locked the door, secured the windows, and kept the fire going. I tried to read, but I couldn't focus. My ears strained for any sound outside. Then, just as I was about to turn in for the night, I heard it again. Footsteps, closer this time. A slow, deliberate crunch of leaves just outside the cabin. I grabbed the hunting knife I'd brought and crept to the window, my pulse racing. I pulled the curtain aside just enough to see. A figure stood just beyond the firelight. I couldn't make out any details, just the shape of a person, standing completely still, facing the cabin. My stomach twisted. I stayed frozen, barely breathing. Then, slowly, the figure took a step back. Then another. And then, without a sound, it turned and disappeared into the trees. I didn't sleep that night. To first light, I packed my things. I didn't care about the rest of the week. I was done. I threw my bag in the car, started the engine, and gunned it down the dirt road without looking back. I didn't tell my coworker what happened. I just thanked him and said the cabin wasn't for me. But sometimes at night, when it's too quiet, I remember that figure, standing there watching, and I wonder, how long had they been there before I noticed? My brother insisted. He told me it would be good for me, that I needed the break. I knew he was right. Life had been wearing me down, and the thought of escaping everything for a few days sounded nice. I didn't care much about hiking or fishing, but I did like the idea of being alone in the woods, away from people. No phone calls, no emails, just quiet. The cabin was about 3 hours from my house, deep in the mountains. My brother had been there once before, said it was old but comfortable. He gave me a rundown of what to expect. A gas stove, a wood-burning fireplace, no Wi-Fi, and spotty cell service at best. I was fine with all of that. I wanted isolation. The drive was peaceful, the winding roads cutting through thick forests. By the time I reached the last stretch of dirt road leading to the cabin, the sun was dipping behind the trees. The cabin itself was small, just a single story with a covered porch and a tiny dock that stretched over a lake. I could see a canoe tied up at the end of it, bobbing gently in the water. Inside, the place smelled like old wood and dust. There was a main room with a couch, a table, and a small kitchen. A single bedroom was off to the side, the bed covered in thick wool blankets. A narrow hallway led to a tiny bathroom, the kind with a standing shower that barely fit a person. I set my bag down and walked through the place, checking the cabinets and drawers. Everything was stocked: canned food, bottled water, even a stack of firewood by the stove. My brother had been thorough. The first night was uneventful. I sat on the porch with a beer, listening to the sounds of the forest. Crickets chirped, and something rustled in the trees, probably a raccoon or a deer. It was peaceful. I slept well. The second day, I decided to explore the area. The lake was calm, the water dark and still. I took the canoe out for a while, drifting in silence. I could see movement beneath the water, fish darting just below the surface. The air smelled fresh, clean. It was exactly what I had needed. In the afternoon, I hiked a little, following a barely visible trail that led deeper into the woods. The trees were dense, their trunks thick and gnarled. I found an old hunting stand, half-rotted, barely holding together. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. That night, something changed. I woke up to a sound outside, a soft, steady crunching, like footsteps on the gravel path leading up to the cabin. I sat up, listening. The sound stopped. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing. I told myself it was an animal. A deer, maybe, but something felt off. I lay back down but couldn't sleep. Every few minutes, I swore I heard something. A shift in the wind, a faint scraping noise. Eventually, I drifted off. The next morning, I found something strange. Near the edge of the porch, the gravel had been disturbed, like something or someone had walked up to the steps and then turned away. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I had stepped there the night before and forgotten. But the feeling of unease stayed with me. That day, I tried to shake it off. I went for another hike, went out on the canoe again. But I kept looking over my shoulder. I felt watched. That night, it got worse. I woke up again, this time to a different sound. A slow, deliberate creaking would shifting under weight. The porch. I sat up, heart pounding. The room was pitch black. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on, aiming it toward the window. Nothing. The sound had stopped. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. I stayed awake for hours, listening, waiting. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I checked the porch again. There were marks on the wood, faint scuffs like something had been dragged. And in the dirt near the steps, something else. Footprints. Not boots. Bare feet. I packed my bag. I told myself I was being stupid, that I was jumping to conclusions. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that someone had been outside my cabin, watching me. I didn't leave right away. I had told myself I'd stay for a few more days, and I didn't want to run just because I was spooked. Instead, I forced myself to act normal. I cooked breakfast, drank my coffee on the porch, tried to pretend I wasn't looking at the tree line every few seconds. That night, I locked the door, shut every window. I kept my flashlight and a knife beside me. I lay there in the dark, listening. And then, around midnight, I heard it again. Not footsteps, breathing, slow, deep, right outside the bedroom window. I held my breath, gripping the knife so hard my hand ached. The breathing stayed for what felt like forever. Then, finally, a slow shuffle. A step. Another. Fading away. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I threw my things into my bag, grabbed my keys, and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop to check the porch. I didn't look back. I drove until I had full cell service and called my brother. He thought I was messing with him, told me it was probably just some hiker or a local messing around. But I know what I heard. When I got home, I couldn't shake it. That feeling of being watched. I barely slept, waking up at every little sound. I started double-checking my locks. Then, a few nights later, I found something outside my house. On my porch, near the front steps, was a single footprint. Bare, wet, facing my door. I took the long drive up to the cabin on a Thursday morning. The air outside was thick with fog, and the roads were damp from last night's rain. My truck's tires crunched over the gravel as I pulled into the clearing, the cabin standing there like something out of a postcard. It was isolated, tucked deep in the woods, and I liked that. I needed the quiet. The cabin belonged to my uncle before he passed away. It wasn't much, just a one-story wooden structure with a tin roof, a small porch, and a single chimney. It had been sitting empty for years, but it was still in decent shape. My plan was simple. Spend a week here, clear my head, maybe do some hunting. No phone, no internet. Just me, the trees, and the sound of the river a mile out. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood and dust. The furniture was basic, a table, a few chairs, a bed with a thin mattress. A fireplace stood in the corner, and used for God knows how long. There was a small kitchen, though I brought most of my food in a cooler. The place had no electricity, only a few old gas lamps that flickered when I tested them. I found the water pump outside still worked, though the water had a metallic taste to it. By the time I unloaded my gear and stocked the shelves with canned food, it was getting late. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the clearing. I grabbed my rifle and took a short walk before dark, mostly to familiarize myself with the land. The woods were quiet, but not in an unsettling way, just the usual stillness of an untouched place. I found an old hunting trail that led down toward a dried-up creek bed. Plenty of deer tracks. Looked promising. That first night, I sat on the porch with a beer, listening to the sounds of the forest. Crickets, distant rustling, the occasional hoot of an owl. Everything felt peaceful. I turned in early, my rifle leaned against the wall next to my bed. Then, at some point during the night, I woke up. No reason, just one of those moments where your body pulls you from sleep. I laid there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening. The wind had picked up, making the trees creak outside. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Footsteps, not an animal too heavy, not the wind too deliberate. Slow, measured steps coming from the porch. My breath caught in my throat. I reached for my rifle, careful not to make a sound. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I waited, my heart pounded. Minutes passed. Then, just as suddenly as they came, the footsteps moved away. I listened as they faded into the woods. I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, I checked the porch. No signs of anything. The ground was still damp from the rain, but I didn't see any tracks leading up to the cabin. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just the old wood shifting. I told myself that and went about my day. I spent the afternoon setting up a deer blind near the creek. It was a good spot. Lots of tracks, plenty of cover. I sat there for a while just watching, rifle in hand. But something felt off. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no movement. It was like everything was holding its breath. That night, it happened again. I woke up to the sound of footsteps. This time, they didn't stop at the porch. They moved around the cabin, slow and steady. I gripped my rifle, my mouth dry. I couldn't see anything through the window, just darkness pressing against the glass. Then the footsteps stopped, right outside the bedroom wall. I didn't move, didn't breathe. A long silence stretched out, the kind that makes your skin crawl. And then, a single knock, soft, almost polite. I didn't answer. I just sat there, frozen, rifle aimed at the door. The knock didn't come again. Minutes passed, an hour. Then, just like the night before, the footsteps slowly moved away. I barely slept. By morning, I had convinced myself it was an animal. Maybe a bear sniffing around. Maybe the wind had knocked a branch against the wall. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I wanted to leave, but something kept me there. Stubbornness, maybe. I told myself I wasn't going to let some noise chase me off. I spent the day scouting the area, looking for any sign of tracks. Still nothing. No footprints, no disturbances in the underbrush. It was like whatever had been outside my cabin didn't leave a trace. That night, I stayed up. I kept the rifle across my lap, a gas lamp burning low on the table. Midnight came and went. Nothing. Maybe it was over. Then, around 3 in the morning, I heard it. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. Right outside the window. Slow, heavy breathing, just inches from the glass. My skin crawled. I turned my head ever so slightly, just enough to see the window out of the corner of my eye. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was out there, watching. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. Then, as if it knew I was awake, the breathing stopped. A long silence. Then, the faintest sound of something moving away into the trees. I was done. At first light, I packed my gear, threw everything in the truck, and got the hell out of there. As I pulled onto the dirt road, I caught one last glimpse of the cabin in my rearview mirror. The door was still closed, the windows unbroken, but something in those woods had been watching me, and I wasn't going to wait around to find out what. Why I agreed to go up there alone. It seemed like a good idea when I first thought about it. A weekend in the woods, just me and my thoughts. No phone service, no internet, no distractions. Just a break from the noise of everything. I needed that, or at least I thought I did. The cabin wasn't anything fancy. It belonged to a friend of a friend, the kind of place that had been in someone's family for decades but rarely got used anymore. When I pulled up the long dirt driveway, the place looked exactly how I expected. Small, old, and isolated. The wood was worn, dark from years of weather exposure. The windows had thick shutters, most of them closed. A short porch wrapped around the front, and the whole thing sat against a dense wall of trees. I stepped out of my car and stretched, taking in the silence. No cars, no people, just the wind moving through the trees. It was peaceful in a way, but also unsettling. I carried my bags inside, pushing the heavy wooden door open with my shoulder. The air inside smelled like dust and wood. There were a few pieces of old furniture, nothing modern. A couch with sunken cushions, a small wooden table with 2 chairs, and a fireplace filled with cold ashes. A few dishes sat on an open shelf above the sink. Felt lived in, but just barely. I locked the door behind me out of habit and set my bag on the couch. The place had no electricity, just a couple of old lanterns and a wood stove for heat. I had brought enough food for the weekend, and since I wasn't planning on doing much, it seemed like it would be fine. Simple. I spent the first hour getting settled, unpacking, checking the place out. There was one bedroom, just a small space with a bed pushed against the wall and a single window looking out into the woods. The bathroom was just a narrow room with an old toilet and a shower that barely looked functional. It wasn't comfortable, but I hadn't expected comfort. By the time the sun started going down, I had a fire going in the stove. The warmth filled the small space quickly, making it feel less empty. I ate a quick dinner, read for a bit, then decided to get some sleep. That's when the feeling started. I couldn't place it at first. It wasn't anything obvious, just a subtle awareness like something was off. I checked the door again, locked. Checked the windows, shut tight. I told myself it was just my mind adjusting to the silence. The way the brain searches for something when it's used to noise. But even as I climbed into bed, the feeling stayed. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, I was awake. Wide awake. My eyes opened fast, and my body was tense before I even knew why. The room was dark except for the dim light from the fireplace down the hall. I listened. Nothing. I held my breath, waiting. My heartbeat was steady but strong in my ears. Then something. A noise. Not loud, but distinct. Something moved outside. I sat up slowly, barely breathing. The sound wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. A crunch, like a footstep on dried leaves. Then another, closer this time. I didn't move. I just sat there listening, waiting. The sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse. After what felt like forever, I exhaled. My body relaxed just a little. Maybe an animal. A deer, maybe. That made sense. It was probably nothing. I laid back down, but it took a long time to fall asleep. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of the cabin, looking for any signs of what I'd heard. There were tracks in the dirt. Not hooves, footprints. Human footprints. Leading from the tree line to the side of the cabin, then back into the woods. I stared at them for a long time, my mind struggling to make sense of it. Maybe someone had been passing through. A hunter, maybe. Someone lost. But why would they come this close to the cabin and then leave? I shook it off and went about my day, but the feeling didn't leave. I tried to distract myself. Reading, chopping wood, making small meals, but every so often, I'd glance at the tree line, expecting to see something. By the time night came again, I had convinced myself that I was overreacting. The woods played tricks on the mind. That's all it was. I made sure the door was locked. I closed the shutters over the windows. I stoked the fire and settled in for another night. I woke up to the sound of something tapping. It was soft, barely there, but constant. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling, waiting, listening. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up, my breath caught in my throat. The sound was coming from the front porch. Slow, deliberate. I climbed out of bed as quietly as I could. My feet barely made a sound against the old wooden floor. The tapping stopped. Silence. I waited. Then, A single knock on the door. Not loud, not aggressive, just one solid knock. I stood there, frozen. Every part of me was screaming to stay still, to not move. Whoever, whatever was out there wasn't walking away this time. I reached for the fire poker, gripping the cold metal tightly. My mind raced. I had no weapon, no phone. No one even knew exactly where I was. Another knock, this one slower. I didn't speak. I didn't ask who it was. I just stood there, waiting, heart pounding. Minutes passed, then more. Then finally, footsteps. Slow, steady, retreating into the woods. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the sun came up, I packed my things and left. I didn't check the porch. I didn't check the woods. I just got in my car and drove. The whole way back, my mind played through every possibility. A lost hiker? A prank? Something worse? I don't know. I never found out. But I never went back. I had been looking forward to this trip for months. A weekend alone in a remote cabin, away from the constant noise of the city. The idea was simple. Disconnect from everything, clear my head, and just exist in the silence of nature. No emails, no phone calls, no people. Just me, the woods, and time. The drive out was longer than I expected. The roads turned from highways to winding country lanes, then finally into a dirt trail that led deep into the woods. I followed the GPS as far as I could, but eventually, I lost service, and the little blue dot on my screen froze in place. The directions I printed told me the cabin was another 4 miles in, so I kept going. The deeper I drove, the more uneasy I felt. It wasn't anything obvious, just a creeping sense of isolation. The trees grew thicker, the road narrower, and there were no signs of other people. I hadn't passed a single car in over an hour. I reassured myself that this was exactly what I had wanted.
No distractions.
Just quiet. I finally reached the cabin just before dusk. It was small but sturdy looking, made of dark wood that blended into the surroundings. A single window faced the driveway, and a porch wrapped around one side. There was a fire pit out front, stacked with logs someone had left behind. The whole place looked well kept but deserted. I stepped out of the car and stretched, taking a deep breath of the crisp, pine-scented air. Felt good, peaceful. I grabbed my bag from the trunk and went up the creaky wooden steps, fumbling with the keys until the lock finally clicked open. The door swung in with a low groan, revealing the simple interior. The cabin was just one large room. A bed in the corner, a small kitchenette, and a wood-burning stove against the far wall. A single wooden table sat near the window with 2 chairs tucked under it. A door to the left led to what I assumed was the bathroom. Simple, functional, exactly what I needed. I set my bag down and checked my phone. No service, just as I expected. I powered it off and tossed it onto the table.
No distractions.
Just the woods and me. I spent the first hour settling in, unpacking my things and getting familiar with the space. The electricity ran on a generator, which hummed faintly from outside. There was no Wi-Fi, no TV. The only entertainment I had was a book I'd brought and whatever sounds the forest decided to offer. After eating a quick meal, I decided to sit outside for a while. The night had fully set in, and the only light came from the stars overhead. The woods were alive with sound. Crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of something moving through the underbrush. It was nice at first, but after a while, the darkness started to feel heavy, pressing in around me. That was when I heard it, a sharp crack in the woods, like a branch snapping underfoot. I sat up, listening. The fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the trees. I told myself it was an animal, a deer maybe, but then I heard it again, closer. I stood, scanning the darkness, but saw nothing. The firelight only reached so far, and beyond that was just blackness. My heartbeat picked up. I wasn't scared, not yet, but I was on edge. I grabbed my flashlight from the porch and shined it toward the trees. Nothing, just the empty woods. I told myself to relax. It was my first night out here. I wasn't used to the sounds of the forest. I had spent too much time in the city, where noise meant people. Out here, noise was just nature doing what it did. I shook my head, laughed quietly at myself, and went inside. I locked the door behind me. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls closer. I tried to read, but my eyes kept drifting to the window. The curtains were open, and all I could see was my own reflection staring back at me. I considered closing them, but decided against it. If I did, I'd just wonder what was outside. That night, I barely slept. Every little creak of the cabin, every rustle of the wind outside made me snap awake. I told myself it was just nerves. I wasn't used to being alone in a place like this. By morning, I felt ridiculous for how on edge I had been. The next day passed without incident. I hiked a few trails, took some photos, and enjoyed the quiet. But as the sun started to dip, I felt that unease creeping back in. I told myself it was nothing. I forced myself to stay outside longer, sitting by the fire until it was almost out. Then, just as I was about to go inside, I saw it. Not a person, not an animal, just something wrong. The fire had burned low again, and in the dim light, I noticed that some of the trees in front of me looked different. The branches were stripped bare, as if something had torn through them. I hadn't noticed that before, and on the ground, leading from the tree lean to my cabin, were footprints. Not boot prints, bare feet, and they weren't mine. I stood frozen, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. I wanted to believe they had been there before, that I just hadn't noticed, but they were fresh. I could see the edges of the prints, sharp in the dirt, untouched by wind or time. Someone had been here. I turned, scanning the trees, but there was nothing, just silence. Too much silence. The usual night sounds were gone. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just heavy, suffocating quiet. I went inside and locked the door. I checked the windows, making sure they were shut tight. The cabin suddenly felt like a cage, too small, too exposed. My only weapon was a kitchen knife, which I placed on the table within reach. I sat there for hours listening. The night stretched on, endless and unbearable. Every creak of the wood, every distant rustle made my skin crawl. But nothing happened. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. I woke up at dawn, the light filtering through the window. I barely remembered falling asleep. But when I sat up, my stomach turned to ice. The footprints were inside, a trail of them, leading from the door to the edge of my bed, then back out again. I never heard the door open, never felt anyone there. I grabbed my keys, my bag, and got out. I didn't look back. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away. When I finally got service, I checked my phone, half expecting some kind of answer. But there was nothing. Just a notification. No SIM card detected. My phone had been tampered with. I never went back. I never told anyone. Because what could I say? Nothing had been taken. I wasn't hurt. There was no proof that anyone had ever been there. But I knew. I still wake up some nights, thinking I hear footsteps. And every time I wonder if I really made it out. I took the cabin because it was cheap. That should have been my first red flag. It was a last-minute rental. A friend had bailed on a hiking trip, and I decided I could use the time away. I found the listing online, just some generic post titled, "Secluded cabin perfect for hunters and hikers." The photos weren't great, just a few grainy shots of a wooden structure surrounded by trees. But it was cheap, available immediately, and only a couple of hours' drive from home. That was all I needed. The owner left a key in a lockbox by the door. No check-in, no meeting. Just me and the place for a few days. The drive up was normal enough. Long stretches of winding roads, then a turn onto a dirt path barely wide enough for my car. Trees closed in on either side. No signs, no other houses, just woods. The cabin itself was basic. One main room with a small kitchen, a table, a couch, and a fireplace. A narrow hallway led to a bathroom and a single bedroom. No Wi-Fi, no cell service. That was expected. I was here to disconnect. The first night was uneventful. Just the usual sounds of an old house settling, branches scraping against the roof. I built a fire, read a little, then went to bed. I remember waking up once in the middle of the night, thinking I'd heard something outside, maybe an animal. I wasn't used to how quiet it was out here. The next morning, I went for a hike. There was a narrow trail behind the cabin, mostly overgrown but still walkable. It led deeper into the woods, winding through trees and brush. I walked for about an hour before turning back. Something about the forest felt off. Couldn't place it. Maybe it was the lack of sound. No birds, no rustling leaves, just dead silence. It made my skin crawl. Back at the cabin, I made lunch and sat on the small porch. The trees felt closer than before, like the space around the cabin had shrunk. Probably just my imagination. That night, I locked the door and checked the windows before bed. I wasn't scared, not really, just uneasy. I told myself I was being paranoid. The woods were playing tricks on me. Then I heard it. A single, deliberate knock on the wall outside. Not an animal, not the wind. A knock, slow, firm, deliberate. I held my breath, waiting for another. Nothing. I wanted to believe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but I knew what I heard. I stayed awake for hours listening. Nothing else happened. The next day, I checked around the cabin. No footprints, no signs of anyone being there. Just undisturbed dirt and leaves. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me tense. The creak of the wood, the crackle of the cooling fireplace, the silence in between. Then, around 2 a.m., I heard it again. Not a knock this time, a sound, a low, drawn-out exhale, right outside my bedroom window. I froze, my heart hammering. The window was closed, the curtains drawn. I didn't move, just listened. Another exhale, closer this time, almost like breathing. I wanted to believe it was an animal, but deep down I knew better. I stayed like that until the sun started creeping through the window. When I finally got up, I checked outside again. No footprints, no sign of anything, but I knew what I'd heard. I didn't hike that day, didn't go far from the cabin at all. I didn't even eat much, just sat there, waiting for night to fall, dreading it. That night, I kept the fireplace burning, kept my flashlight close. I locked the door, pushed a chair against it, made sure every window was shut tight. I was prepared to stay awake all night, but at some point, exhaustion won. I woke up to the sound of something moving outside. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. I sat up, barely breathing, listened. The footsteps stopped. Then a click, the doorknob turning, the lock held, but whoever or whatever was out there had tried to get in. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the window. Nothing, but I could feel something watching. I don't know how, but I knew I wasn't alone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat by the door, waiting for something else to happen, but the footsteps never came back. The first light, I packed my bag. I didn't even bother cleaning up. I just grabbed my things and left. The whole drive back, I felt like I was being watched. When I got home, I checked the listing again. It was gone. No record of it ever being there. The number I'd used to book, it was disconnected. I don't know who or what was out there, but I know one thing. I wasn't alone in that cabin. Why I went back to that cabin. Maybe it was some false sense of closure. Maybe I thought it would feel different now that time had passed. But I was wrong. If anything, it felt worse. The first time I came here, I was younger, maybe 24. It was supposed to be a weekend alone, away from everything. I had rented the place online, some small, off-the-grid spot deep in the woods of northern Michigan. No cell service, no internet, just me, a few books, and the sound of the wind moving through the trees. I remember feeling excited about it. I had wanted to prove to myself that I could handle solitude, that I didn't need to be around people all the time. I had driven out on a Friday afternoon, following a long, winding road that eventually turned to dirt. The trees grew thicker the farther I went, closing in, blocking out the sky. The last stretch of road wasn't really a road at all, just a narrow path barely wide enough for my car. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, it was just as the pictures had shown. Old but sturdy, a single-story wooden structure with a slanted roof and a wraparound porch. The air smelled like damp earth and pine needles. It was silent in a way that felt unnatural, like the world had gone still just for me. I didn't mind at first. I unpacked my things, set my bags inside, and took a quick look around. There wasn't much to see. Just a single room with a bed against the far wall, a tiny kitchen, and a wood stove in the center. The bathroom was an outhouse out back, something I hadn't noticed when I booked the place. Not ideal, but I could deal with it. That first night, everything seemed fine. I made dinner, read for a while, then went to bed early. But something woke me up in the middle of the night. A sound. It wasn't loud, just the faintest creak of wood, like someone shifting their weight on an old floorboard. I sat up in bed, listening. The cabin was dark, and for a second, I wasn't sure if I had actually heard anything or if my half-asleep brain was just playing tricks on me. But then it happened again. A creak, this time closer. I reached for my phone before remembering that it was useless out here. No service, no way to call anyone. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to get out of bed, to check the locks on the door and windows. Everything was shut tight. I barely slept the rest of the night. Every little noise sent a jolt of fear through me. The wind against the cabin, a branch snapping in the woods, the distant call of some animal I couldn't name. By morning, I felt exhausted but stupid for letting my imagination get the best of me. The second night was worse. I had been outside chopping wood before sundown when I saw something in the dirt. Footprints, not mine. I hadn't seen them the day before, and they weren't fresh, but they were there, leading from the tree line to the cabin. I tried to convince myself that maybe the owner had been out here recently, checking on the place before I arrived. But deep down, I knew that wasn't right. The prints were spaced strangely, like whoever made them had been moving slowly, carefully. I locked the door early that night, shutting the curtains, making sure the fire was going strong in the wood stove. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then the noises started again. First, it was just the creaks like before. But then I heard something else. A dragging sound, slow, deliberate, coming from outside. I stayed in bed, barely breathing, listening as the sound moved from one side of the cabin to the other, like someone was circling it, testing it. I wanted to believe it was an animal, maybe a deer or some other thing moving through the brush. But deep down, I knew better. At some point, I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The light streaming through the curtains felt like a blessing. I stepped outside, my hands shaking as I checked around the cabin. The footprints were gone, but something else was there. The firewood I had chopped the day before was gone. Completely. Not scattered, not moved, just gone. Like someone had taken it. I left that day, packed my things and drove straight home, telling myself I had overreacted, that it was nothing, that I had just let my nerves get the best of me. But I never stopped thinking about it. And now, years later, I was back. I had convinced myself I needed to face whatever had happened, to prove to myself that it had all been in my head. The cabin looked the same. The road to get there was just as long, just as isolated. But something felt different this time. The air was heavier. The silence was deeper. I stepped inside, expecting to feel some kind of closure, but all I felt was dread, like I had made a mistake. That first night, I barely slept. Every sound felt amplified, every creak of the wood, every gust of wind. But nothing happened.
No footprints. No dragging noises.
Just silence. By the second night, I had convinced myself that nothing was going to happen, that I had been paranoid before, that I had let my imagination run wild. And then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it. The same slow, dragging sound outside. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened. And then the worst part, a whisper, right outside the window. Not words, just breath, just the sound of something there. I grabbed my keys, my bag, everything I could carry, and ran to the car. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back in town, surrounded by people, by noise, by life. I don't know what was out there, but I know it wasn't in my head, and I know I'm never going back. I don't know why I agreed to stay in that cabin alone. Maybe I wanted to prove something to myself. Maybe I just wanted some peace and quiet. But if I could go back, I would have never stepped foot in that place. It was my uncle's cabin, deep in the woods of northern Minnesota. I had been there a few times when I was younger, but never alone. It was a simple structure, old and worn, with a creaky wooden porch and a single chimney. It had no electricity, no running water, and no cell service. Just a propane stove, an old wood-burning fireplace, and a hand pump well about 50 yards from the cabin. I packed enough supplies for a week: canned food, bottled water, a hunting knife, a rifle, and a flashlight with extra batteries. I told myself it would be an escape from the noise of life, a chance to be alone with my thoughts. The first day was uneventful. I arrived late in the afternoon, unlocked the door with the key my uncle gave me, and set my things down. The cabin smelled of dust and old wood, like it hadn't been aired out in years. The furniture was basic: a small wooden table, 2 chairs, a sagging couch, and a single bed in the corner with an old quilt draped over it. There was a bookshelf filled with old paperbacks and a few hunting magazines. The fireplace was stacked with wood, which was a relief, since the nights were still cold. As the sun went down, I sat on the porch and listened to the woods. The sounds of the forest were louder than I expected. Branches creaking in the wind, the distant hoot of an owl, something rustling in the underbrush. The darkness was absolute, heavier than anything I was used to. I turned in early, locking the door behind me and double-checking the latch. The rifle sat within arm's reach by the bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound. Something moving outside. Not the wind, not an animal, something deliberate. I held my breath and listened. Footsteps, slow and heavy, crunching against the dead leaves just beyond the porch. My heart pounded in my ears. I reached for the rifle and slid out of bed as quietly as I could. I crept to the window and peered out. It was too dark to see anything, but I could feel it. Someone was out there. I stayed like that for what felt like an hour, gripping the rifle and staring into the darkness. The footsteps eventually faded, retreating into the woods. I barely slept after that. The next morning, I searched around the cabin, looking for tracks. The ground was hard and dry, but I found something near the trees: shoe prints. Not boots like a hunter would wear, sneakers. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe some lost hiker, maybe some kid messing around. But something about it didn't sit right. I forced myself to go about my day, collecting firewood, boiling water from the well, trying to keep busy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I locked the door and wedged a chair under the knob for good measure. I kept the rifle close. I listened. Around midnight, the sounds started again. This time, it wasn't footsteps. It was tapping. A slow, deliberate tap against the side of the cabin, near the front door. My stomach clenched. I gripped the rifle and stayed still, barely breathing. The tapping moved. Around the side of the cabin, then to the back, then to the other side. Whoever it was, they were circling me. I wanted to call out, to scare them off, but my throat was dry. I just sat there, heart hammering, waiting. The tapping stopped. For a long time, there was silence. Then something worse. The doorknob rattled. Just a slight jiggle, as if someone was testing it. My blood went cold. The chair held, but the idea that someone was inches away from me, just on the other side of that door, made my skin crawl. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, the noise stopped. I stayed awake until dawn. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I packed my things in record time, slung the rifle over my shoulder, and stepped onto the porch. My truck was parked about a quarter-mile away, down a dirt path that cut through the trees. That's when I saw it. Something had been on the porch. The wooden boards were scratched, deep gouges running across them, like someone had dragged a knife along the surface. And there, in the dirt near the steps, were more footprints. The same sneakers, leading back into the woods. I didn't wait. I started walking, fast but steady, gripping the rifle. The woods felt different now. Wrong. Every tree, every shadow, seemed like it was hiding something. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone following me, but I saw nothing. Then, as I reached the truck, I noticed something else. The driver's side door was open. I knew I had locked it. I was sure of it. I stopped, listening. The truck was silent. The forest was silent. I reached for the rifle, raising it slightly as I stepped closer. My breath came in short bursts. I peered inside. Nothing. The truck was empty, but the glove compartment was open. Papers scattered across the passenger seat. Someone had been inside, searching. I climbed in, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I backed out onto the narrow dirt road, I looked in the rearview mirror. For just a second, I thought I saw movement between the trees, a shadow slipping deeper into the forest. I didn't stop. I drove until I hit the main road, until I was far away from that place. I never went back to the cabin. I never told my uncle what happened. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear it. The slow, deliberate tapping against the wood, circling, waiting. I had been looking forward to a quiet weekend in the mountains. Work had been exhausting, and I needed time away from everything. Away from the city, the traffic, and people. A friend had told me about a small, isolated cabin deep in the woods, a place where I could truly disconnect. It wasn't one of those fancy rental places with Wi-Fi and modern amenities. It was an old, simple wooden cabin, meant for people who wanted solitude. That was exactly what I needed. The drive up the mountain took longer than expected. The roads were winding, barely wide enough for one vehicle in some spots, and full of potholes. Felt like no one had maintained them in years. My car bounced with every dip, and I gripped the wheel tightly, keeping an eye on the sheer drop to my right. There were no guardrails, just a long fall into thick trees below. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. By the time I reached the turnoff leading to the cabin, the sun had started to set. The dirt road leading deeper into the woods was even worse than the main road. Rocks, fallen branches, deep tire grooves from previous visitors. My car struggled, but I kept going. The directions my friend had given me were straightforward. Follow the dirt path for 2 miles until I saw the cabin. When I finally pulled up, the cabin looked just as I had expected. Small, old, with a simple porch and a stack of firewood against the side. The trees surrounding it were tall and dense, blocking out most of the remaining sunlight. There was no electricity, no plumbing, just a hand pump for water and an old wood-burning stove. It smelled like damp wood inside, but it wasn't unpleasant. I unloaded my supplies, canned food, a few bottles of water, a flashlight, and my sleeping bag. There was a bed inside, but I didn't trust the old mattress, so I planned to sleep on my own gear. The first night was uneventful. The silence out there was almost overwhelming. No traffic, no sirens, no distant hum of the city. Just the occasional rustling of leaves outside and the chirping of insects. I fell asleep faster than I expected. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. It wasn't a noise that woke me. It was the absence of one. The insects had gone silent. No wind, no movement outside. Just an unnatural stillness. My flashlight was next to me, so I grabbed it and flicked it on. The dim beam barely illuminated the cabin, but everything looked the same. My car was parked right outside the small window, just as I had left it. I listened. Nothing. I forced myself to lie back down, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe animals had moved on. Maybe this was normal for deep woods at night. But my gut told me something felt off. Took me a long time to fall asleep again. The next day, I went for a short hike. I stayed on the dirt path, not wanting to get lost. The trees stretched high above, creating a canopy that let only slivers of sunlight through. The air was cool, fresh. I had no cell service, which I expected, but it felt strange knowing I couldn't contact anyone even if I wanted to. A few hours later, I headed back to the cabin. As I approached, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The firewood stack had been disturbed. I was sure it had been neatly stacked when I arrived, but now several logs were on the ground, as if someone had rifled through them. Could have been an animal, I told myself. A bear, maybe, but I saw no tracks, no signs of anything rummaging around. I checked the cabin door, still locked. The windows were shut. Nothing inside had been moved. I tried to shake off the unease and went about my evening. I cooked some canned soup over the stove, ate, and sat on the porch for a while, watching the last bit of sunlight disappear behind the trees. That night, I woke up again. This time, there was a sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate crunching against the dirt outside. I held my breath, straining to listen. They weren't close, maybe near the tree-line, but they were steady, moving slowly. I sat up carefully, my heart pounding. My flashlight was still in my hand from the night before. I clicked it on and aimed it at the window, but the glare made it hard to see outside. The footsteps stopped. I waited, barely breathing. Nothing. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, but eventually, exhaustion overtook fear, and I drifted off. The next morning, I walked around the cabin, looking for tracks. The ground was too hard to hold footprints, but I knew what I had heard. I checked my car, still locked, nothing missing. That evening, I decided to keep the fire burning in the stove. I didn't know why, but something about the warmth made me feel safer. I sat by the small window listening. The silence had returned. Then a sound. Not footsteps this time. A single knock. Not on the door. On the window. I froze. The knock didn't come again. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My flashlight was already in my hand, but I didn't want to turn it on. If someone was outside, they would see me move. I waited. Minutes passed. Nothing. I couldn't sleep after that. I kept my flashlight off, my ears straining for any noise. At some point in the early morning, I must have dozed off because I woke to daylight streaming through the window. I had planned to stay the whole weekend, but I knew then I was leaving. I packed up quickly, throwing everything into my bag. I stepped outside cautiously, scanning the trees. Nothing. Then I saw it. On the side of the cabin, near the window where I had heard the knock, was a single muddy handprint. Large, smudged, human. I didn't stay to inspect it. I got in my car, started it, and drove. My tires spun on the loose dirt, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I drove until I reached the main road. Then I kept driving until I saw another car, another person. Only then did I pull over to catch my breath. I never told my friend what happened. I never went back. The cabin is probably still there, but whoever was out there that night, they're still there too. I don't know why I agreed to this. Maybe I was trying to prove something to myself, or maybe I just needed the space. A week alone in a cabin, deep in the Montana wilderness. No cell service, no internet. Just me, the trees, and my own thoughts. I told myself it would be peaceful, a reset. But by the third night, I realized I'd made a mistake. The first couple of days weren't bad. I spent my time hiking around the property, cooking simple meals on the gas stove, and reading paperbacks by the fireplace. The cabin was old but sturdy, a two-room structure with a bedroom in the back and a main area with a fireplace, a kitchen, and a small table. There was no electricity, just a few battery-powered lanterns and a crank radio that barely picked up a signal. Water came from a pump outside. The outhouse was about 30 yards away, which wasn't fun in the freezing dark. The first night, I barely slept. The silence was too much. I'd lived in the city my whole life, where the hum of traffic and distant sirens were normal. Out here, there was nothing, just the occasional rustling of trees, the creak of the cabin settling, and once in a while, something scurrying outside. Probably a raccoon, I told myself. On the second night, I started to notice the noises. At first, it was subtle branches snapping in the woods, too rhythmic to be the wind. A faint rustling, like something moving through the brush. I told myself it was just the normal sounds of nature. But then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, just beyond the tree line. I turned off my lantern and sat in the dark, straining to listen. They would start, then stop, as if someone or something was waiting for me to make a move. I barely slept that night, jumping at every creak and whisper of wind. When dawn finally came, I forced myself outside, circling the cabin to check for tracks. Nothing, just undisturbed dirt and pine needles. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was a deer or a bear passing through. But deep down, I didn't believe that. By the third day, an unease settled over me. The woods felt different, too quiet.
No birds.
No wind, just a heavy stillness that made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I started keeping the axe from the woodpile inside with me, just in case. I double-checked the door locks, even though anyone with enough determination could easily break in. That night, I lay in bed, gripping the axe handle, staring at the ceiling, listening. Then, around 2 a.m., I heard it again. Footsteps. This time, they were closer. Slow, careful, right outside the cabin. I held my breath. The floorboards near the door creaked. Someone was on the porch. I wanted to call out, to demand who was there, but fear kept me silent. I reached for my flashlight, but then thought better of it. If they didn't know I was awake, I wanted to keep it that way. Then the doorknob turned. It rattled once, then again. I gripped the axe tighter, my pulse pounding in my ears. The latch held. Whoever was out there lingered for a few seconds longer before the footsteps retreated. Slow, unhurried, as if they wanted me to know they weren't in a rush. I didn't sleep at all after that. By morning, I was exhausted, but I knew I had to make a decision. I had 4 more days left in this cabin, but there was no way I was staying. I packed my bag, grabbed my flashlight, and started the long hike back to my truck. I didn't make it far. A few hundred yards into the woods, I found something that stopped me cold. Footprints. Not animal tracks, not hiking boots, bare feet, dozens of them circling the cabin. Some looked fresh, others were older, half washed away by the rain. But they were everywhere. Some came from deep in the woods, some led up to the porch, and some disappeared behind trees. I had been right. Someone had been out here, not just last night, but for a while, watching me. I turned around and bolted back to the cabin. I locked the door behind me, my mind racing. Who the hell was out there? Why were they barefoot? How long had they been watching? I checked my food supply, making sure nothing had been tampered with. Everything seemed normal, but that didn't make me feel any better. I pulled the heavy wooden dresser in front of the door. It wouldn't stop someone determined to get in, but at least it would slow them down. That night, I sat in the dark, listening. And then, around midnight, I heard it again. Not footsteps this time, breathing. Right outside the cabin. Slow, steady, just on the other side of the wall. I held my breath, gripping the axe. The breathing stayed there for what felt like forever. Then something scraped against the wood. A long, dragging sound. Not like nails, more like fingers. Then silence. I didn't sleep. I didn't even move until the first light of morning. As soon as the sun was up, I grabbed my bag and left everything else behind. I ran. I didn't care if I was being loud. I just ran. Took me hours to reach my truck. When I finally got there, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the keys in the ignition. I floored it down the dirt road, not stopping until I hit the nearest gas station. I told the clerk I'd been out at the old cabin up the mountain. He gave me a strange look. "Alone?" he asked. I nodded. He just shook his head. "You shouldn't do that." I didn't ask why. I didn't want to know. I never went back for my stuff. I don't care what I left behind. Whatever was out there, it had been watching me, and it wanted me to know. I didn't plan to end up in that cabin. It just sort of happened. Life has a way of unraveling, and before you know it, you're someplace you never thought you'd be. That's how it was for me. My life had fallen apart in a way I never expected. Divorce, job loss, debt piling up faster than I could keep track of. I had nowhere else to go. My cousin owned a small cabin up in northern Minnesota, way out in the woods, past where the roads are even paved. He said I could stay there as long as I needed, at least until I figured out my next move. I didn't have much of a choice, so I took it. The place wasn't much. A single-story wooden structure with a sagging roof, a rusted-out old truck in the driveway that hadn't moved in at least a decade, and a porch that leaned slightly to one side. Inside, it was dusty, filled with old furniture that smelled like mildew and mothballs. There was no internet, barely any cell service, and the only electricity came from a janky old generator that sputtered every time I turned it on. But it was quiet, and after everything I'd been through, quiet was what I needed. The first few days passed uneventfully. I spent most of my time splitting wood, fixing up what I could, and trying to adjust to the isolation. The nights were the hardest. The darkness out there was absolute, pressing in from all sides. No streetlights, no passing cars, just the wind in the trees and the occasional rustle of some animal moving through the brush. I tried not to let it get to me, but something about it put me on edge. It was on the 5th night that I first noticed something was off. I had been outside chopping wood late into the evening when I got the distinct feeling I was being watched. It wasn't just paranoia. It was that deep, gut-level instinct that something isn't right. I stopped mid-swing, my breath hanging in the cold air, and slowly turned around. Nothing, just the trees, standing tall and silent, their bare branches reaching toward the sky. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. That night, I barely slept. Every little sound outside made me jump. Branches creaking, leaves rustling, the distant hoot of an owl. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was just adjusting to the isolation, but deep down I knew better. The next morning, I found footprints in the snow. They weren't mine. They were too large, too wide, and the stride was too long. They circled the cabin, stopping at the windows, the front door, and then trailing off into the trees. I crouched down, inspecting them closer. The prints were deep, like whoever or whatever had made them was heavy. I stared at them for a long time, my breath coming in shallow puffs. Then I went inside and locked the door again. For the next few nights, I didn't sleep. I kept the lights off, sat near the window, and listened. Around midnight, I heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the trees. A crunching sound as something heavy shifted in the underbrush. It was close, too close. I gripped the handle of the old hunting knife I had found in one of the kitchen drawers. Not that it would do much against something that big. I waited, my heart hammering, until the sounds eventually faded away. By the end of the first week, I was exhausted. I barely ate. I barely moved. I just sat in that cabin, waiting, listening, knowing that whatever was out there would be back. And it was. Every night, it came a little closer. One night, I woke up to the sound of something pressing against the cabin wall. A deep, heavy pressure that made the wooden beams creak. I held my breath, gripping the knife so hard my fingers ached. Then, slowly, the pressure lifted. I heard the sound of footsteps retreating into the woods. I didn't move until the sun came up. I knew I had to leave. Whatever was out there wasn't just passing through. It was watching, waiting, maybe testing me. I didn't want to stick around long enough to find out what it was planning. The problem was, I hadn't driven my truck since I got there, and after sitting in the cold for over a week, it refused to start. I popped the hood, but I wasn't a mechanic. I had no clue what was wrong with it. I was stuck. That night, the sounds were different. It wasn't just footsteps. It was breathing. Heavy, labored breathing right outside the window. I sat in the darkness, my back pressed against the wall, barely daring to breathe myself. Then came the scratching. Long, slow scrapes against the wood, like something testing the strength of the walls. My skin crawled. I stayed that way until dawn, gripping the knife with white-knuckled fingers. The next day, I made a decision. I packed a bag with what little I had, layered up against the cold, and set out on foot. The nearest town was miles away, but I didn't care. I wasn't spending another night in that cabin. The woods were eerily silent as I walked, my boots crunching through the snow. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following me, but there was nothing. Just endless trees and the distant call of a crow overhead. I made it to the main road just as the sun was starting to set. My legs ached, and I was freezing, but I didn't stop. I kept walking, kept moving, until I saw a truck approaching in the distance. I flagged it down, barely able to speak from the cold and exhaustion. The driver, an old man with a weathered face, took one look at me and told me to get in. I didn't ask questions. I just climbed inside and shut the door. I never went back to that cabin. I never told my cousin what had happened. I just made up some excuse about needing to be closer to town and left it at that. To this day, I don't know what was out there, watching me from the trees. Maybe it was just some animal. Maybe it was something else. I don't think I want to know. All I know is that I got out, and that's all that matters. Some places you're just not meant to stay. I never thought I'd end up in a place like this, but life has a way of pushing you into corners you never expected to find yourself in. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to get away from everything and figure out what was next. The cabin, tucked deep in the Montana wilderness, belonged to an old coworker who had moved out of the country. He let me rent it for next to nothing. A place to clear my head, he had said. A place to breathe. At first, I welcomed the solitude. No traffic, No people, no obligations beyond chopping wood and keeping the place from falling apart. Felt almost peaceful. I spent my days fishing in the nearby creek, reading, and hiking through the thick forest that surrounded the property. At night, I would sit on the porch and listen to the wind push through the pines, the occasional hoot of an owl breaking the stillness. I had convinced myself that this was exactly what I needed, that I could learn to be alone, to be at peace with myself. That illusion didn't last long. The first sign that something wasn't right came about 2 weeks in. It was subtle, something I could have ignored if I hadn't been paying attention. The first time it happened, I had just come back from checking the mail, a 40-minute walk down a winding dirt path to the nearest road. I dropped the stack of bills and useless advertisements on the small kitchen table and went to wash up. When I came back, the papers were scattered across the floor. I blamed the wind, even though I was sure I had shut the door. I let it go. Then one night, I woke up to a noise just outside the cabin, a slow, dragging sound. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer moving through the brush. But as I lay there, holding my breath, I realized it was too deliberate, too heavy. Something was moving just beyond the walls, circling. I reached for the flashlight I kept next to the bed, but by the time I got the nerve to pull back the curtain and shine it outside, the sound had stopped. There was nothing there. The next morning, I found deep gouges in the wood of the porch, long, jagged scratches running parallel to each other, as if something with massive claws had raked across it. I tried to tell myself it was a bear, maybe even a cougar, though the marks didn't match anything I had ever seen before. I cleaned it up and tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut that told me something was wrong. The sounds became a regular occurrence. Sometimes it was footsteps crunching through the underbrush, stopping just outside my window. Other times it was that dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled through the dirt. Every time I built up the courage to look, there was nothing there. It got to the point where I barely slept, lying awake in the darkness, waiting. One night, the noises stopped completely. At first, I thought it was a relief. I almost convinced myself that whatever had been lurking around had finally moved on. But then I noticed something else. The forest had gone silent. No crickets, no owls, not even the rustling of the wind through the trees. Just an oppressive, suffocating stillness. It was worse than the noises, much worse. That was the night I saw it. I had been sitting in the living room, pretending to read, when I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Just outside the window, standing at the tree line. A shape too large to be a man, too upright to be a bear. The flashlight was sitting on the table, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I just sat there, breath caught in my throat, staring at the thing in the dark. It was watching me. I could feel it. Then it moved. A slow, deliberate step forward, out of the shadows. The weak glow of the porch light caught its shape just enough to make out details I wish I hadn't seen. Its body was covered in patches of matted fur, its arms too long, its fingers tipped with curved claws that reflected the dim light. But it was the face that made my stomach turn. The snout was short, almost human-like, with teeth too large for its mouth. And the eyes, God, the eyes. They were small, sunken, and black, like pits in its skull. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. Then, without warning, it turned and loped back into the woods, disappearing into the trees without a sound. The moment it was gone, the night noises returned. The crickets, the owls, the wind, like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of the room, shotgun in my lap, waiting for the sun to rise. When it finally did, I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and left. I didn't look back. I didn't call my coworker to explain why I was leaving. I just drove, putting as much distance between myself and that cabin as possible. I never went back, and I never will. I never thought I'd end up in a place like this. A worn-down cabin deep in the Montana wilderness, alone and surrounded by nothing but miles of trees, silence, and the creeping sensation of being watched. But after my life unraveled, it was the only place left to go. My name doesn't really matter. What matters is that, in the span of a year, I lost my job, my apartment, and my father, leaving me with little more than an old truck, some clothes, and the vague notion that I needed to get away from everything. A friend of my father's, an old hunting buddy, mentioned he had a cabin up north that I could use while I figured things out. I took him up on the offer, desperate for a reset, some space to breathe. The place was isolated, accessible only by a winding dirt road that stretched for miles from the nearest highway. The cabin itself was simple: one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living area with a wood-burning stove that would be my only source of heat. There was a generator for power, though I was warned it wasn't the most reliable, and no running water aside from what I could collect from a nearby stream. It wasn't ideal, but it was cheap, and at the time, that was all I cared about. The first few days passed in a blur of chopping wood, setting up supplies, and getting used to the silence. The quiet was unnerving at first. Living in the city all my life, I was used to the hum of traffic, distant sirens, people shouting in the streets. Here, the only sounds were the rustling of trees and the occasional call of some unseen animal in the distance. At night, the dark was absolute. Without streetlights or the glow of neighboring homes, the only light came from the moon, casting strange shadows that made the trees look like twisted figures reaching for the cabin. I told myself I'd get used to it. The first sign that something was wrong came on the fourth night. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard something outside. It wasn't the usual sounds of the wind or distant wildlife. It was closer, deliberate, slow, crunching footsteps in the snow, moving around the cabin. I held my breath, straining to listen, my heart pounding. Then, just as suddenly as they had started, the footsteps stopped. I waited, my ears ringing in the silence, but there was nothing. The next morning, I checked around the cabin. The snow had a fresh layer from the night before, and sure enough, there were tracks leading around the building. They were large, but not shaped like any animal print I recognized. The toes were long, almost human-like, but the gait was wrong, too wide, too heavy. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the melting snow, the prints distorted by shifting ice. I didn't want to think about the alternative. That day, I made sure to keep the shotgun my father had left me loaded and within arm's reach. I also set up a few makeshift tripwires around the perimeter, empty cans strung up with fishing line. If anything came too close, I'd hear it. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak of the old wood, every gust of wind that rattled the walls. For hours, nothing happened. Then, just past midnight, I heard it again. Crunch. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. I gripped the shotgun, my hands slick with sweat. The footsteps stopped just outside the bedroom window. I didn't move, barely even breathed. The only sound was the faint rasp of my own pulse in my ears. Then, a noise that made my stomach drop, fingernails or something like them, scraping against the glass. A slow, testing sound, as if whatever was out there was trying to find a way inside. I must have stayed frozen like that for an hour, maybe more. Eventually, the scratching stopped, and the footsteps moved away, disappearing into the night. The next morning, I found more tracks, circling the cabin in erratic loops, and on the glass of my bedroom window, long smeared streaks, as if whatever had been outside had pressed its face or hands against it. I told myself it was just an animal, a bear maybe, or a wolf acting strangely. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I thought about leaving, but I had nowhere to go. I had just enough money to last me a few months, and if I left, I'd be back at square one, sleeping in my truck, living off gas station food. I decided to stay, to keep the shotgun close, to make sure every door and window was locked before sundown. The visits continued every night without fail. The sound of footsteps in the snow, the faintest shadow passing by the window, and then the noises started coming from the roof. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and hear it. Something moving up there, slow and heavy. The first time, I thought it was just an overactive imagination, but then I heard the wood creak under the weight. The worst part, the way the movement stopped right above my bed and just stayed there, like it was listening. I barely slept anymore. My body was always on edge, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. The days blurred together, exhaustion weighing down on me. Then one night, everything escalated. I had just shut off the generator and was climbing into bed when I heard a loud thud against the side of the cabin. Then another. Something was throwing itself against the walls. The whole building shook. My breath caught in my throat as I grabbed the shotgun and moved toward the door. I could hear snarling, a guttural, wet sound that didn't belong to any animal I knew. Then, a loud crack. The wood near the doorframe splintered. I didn't think. I raised the shotgun and fired through the door. The blast echoed through the trees, and for a second, there was silence. Then, a screech, high-pitched and unnatural, like metal scraping against metal. I fired again, blindly, my hands shaking. Then, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing, ragged and uneven. The rest of the night was silent. Whatever it was, I had scared it off, but I knew it wasn't gone. The next morning, I made my decision. I packed what little I had and left. I didn't bother locking the door. I didn't even look back. I drove straight through the night, only stopping when I reached the outskirts of a town. I found a cheap motel and collapsed onto the bed, my mind still reeling. I never went back to that cabin. I never asked my father's friend if he'd seen anything like that before. I don't think I want to know. I didn't end up at the cabin because I wanted to. Life has a way of pushing you where you don't want to go. And for me, that push came after I lost my job, my apartment, and any sense of stability. I had a buddy named Rick who owned a little place way up in northern Montana, just a short distance from the Canadian border. He offered to let me stay there for a while, at least until I got my feet back under me. It wasn't much, just an old wooden cabin sitting alone in the middle of endless pine trees. I had no other options, so I packed up what little I had left and made the trip. The drive out was long and uneventful. By the time I pulled onto the narrow dirt road leading to the cabin, the sun was already low in the sky. The place looked even smaller in person, a squat, weathered building with a sagging front porch. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that settled deep in your bones. I stepped out of my truck and immediately noticed how quiet it was. No cars, no distant hum of civilization, just the wind moving through the trees. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and dust. It was basic, one bedroom, a tiny bathroom, a kitchen, and a living space with a wood-burning stove. There was no TV, no internet, and the only source of heat was the stove. I had brought enough food and supplies to last a few weeks, figuring I'd have time to think, maybe come up with a plan for what came next. The first few nights were uneventful. I spent my days chopping wood, reading, and taking long walks through the woods. I wasn't used to the isolation, but I figured I could manage for a little while. The forest was dense, and even during the day, it had a way of making you feel watched. I chalked it up to my nerves. I had been through a rough patch, and my mind was just playing tricks on me. Then things started happening. One night, I was lying in bed when I heard something outside. It wasn't an animal. Not the rustling of deer moving through the brush or the distant howls of coyotes. This was something heavier, slow, deliberate steps crunching through the leaves just beyond my window. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped, then a long moment of silence. Then a soft scraping sound against the wall of the cabin. My stomach turned. I forced myself to get up, grabbing the flashlight from the nightstand. I moved to the window and shined the light outside, but I saw nothing, just trees and darkness. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there, watching. The next morning, I found tracks in the dirt around the cabin. They weren't bear tracks, and they definitely weren't human. The shape was wrong, too elongated, with deep claw marks trailing behind each step. My first thought was a large wolf, but something about the way the tracks were spaced unsettled me. Whatever made them had been walking on two legs. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was some deformed animal, a bear with an injury, something explainable. I tried to focus on my daily routine, but I couldn't shake the unease that settled in my gut. Every night, I would hear movement outside, soft rustling at first, then heavier steps closer and closer. One evening, I was chopping wood when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned just in time to see something duck behind a tree. My breath caught in my throat. It had been tall, too tall. The color of its fur, or was it skin, blended with the shadows. I took a step forward, but nothing moved. The woods were still. That night, I barricaded the door with furniture. The sounds outside grew worse. Something was circling the cabin, slow and methodical. Every so often, I'd hear a sharp scrape against the wood, then a low, guttural breath right outside the window. I refused to look. If I didn't see it, maybe it wouldn't see me. Sleep became impossible. I would doze off for an hour or two before waking up to some new sound. A thump against the wall, the sound of something pressing against the door. I stopped going outside at night. I barely went outside at all. The isolation that had once seemed peaceful now felt like a death sentence. One night, the scratching at the window turned to pounding. I shot out of bed, grabbing the old hunting knife I kept beside me. The pounding was steady, shaking the entire cabin. I could hear heavy breathing just on the other side of the wall. I wanted to run, but where? The truck was parked a few yards away, but that meant stepping outside. I wasn't sure I'd make it. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the pounding stopped. The woods fell silent. I stood there for what felt like hours before I finally moved to peek out the window. My stomach turned. The porch was covered in long, deep scratches. Something had been trying to get in. That was it. I wasn't staying another night. The first light, I threw everything I could into my truck. I didn't care if I left supplies behind. I just needed to get the hell out. I barely glanced at the cabin as I pulled away, but in my rearview mirror, I saw something standing at the edge of the trees, tall, watching. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town. I checked into a cheap motel, locked the door, and sat on the bed, my hands shaking. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Who would believe me? I never went back to that cabin. Rick called me a few times, asking why I left so suddenly. I never gave him a real answer. Eventually, he stopped asking. That was years ago, but I still dream about it sometimes. The feeling of being watched, the sound of something scraping against the walls, the weight of knowing that I was not alone out there. I tell myself it was just my imagination, that isolation does strange things to the mind. But deep down, I know the truth. There was something out there, and it wanted in. I don't even know how to start this, but I guess I'll just say it. What happened to me in that cabin still doesn't make sense. But it was real. And I know that because I still wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, my heart pounding, my ears straining for sounds that aren't there. It started when I booked a remote cabin in the mountains for a week. I wanted to get away. Life had been weighing down on me, and I needed space to breathe, think, and just exist without the noise of the city. I found this place online, no cell service, no Wi-Fi, completely isolated. It sounded perfect. The pictures showed a small, single-story cabin with a wood stove, a bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a porch that looked out onto a stretch of thick forest. The owner told me it was about a 10-mile drive from the nearest town, then another mile off the main road, accessible by a dirt path that wound through the trees. The drive up was uneventful. The road leading to the cabin was rough, full of potholes and loose gravel, but my truck handled it fine. When I finally reached the cabin, it looked just like the pictures. Small, old but sturdy, with stacked firewood on the side and a well in the back. The air smelled fresh, crisp, like pine and damp earth. It was quiet, peaceful. The first day went by fine. I settled in, unpacked my food, started a fire in the stove, and sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the trees. The silence was almost overwhelming. I wasn't used to it. No cars, no sirens, no voices. Just the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The second night was when things changed. I had been sitting by the fire, reading, when I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was an animal. A deer, maybe, but then I realized the footsteps weren't random. They were slow, deliberate, not the quick, light movements of a creature foraging or passing through. It sounded like someone walking, step by step, moving around the cabin. I turned off the lamp and sat still, listening. My breath felt too loud in my ears. The footsteps stopped near the back of the cabin. Then silence. I waited, straining to hear something, anything. After a while, I convinced myself I had imagined it. Maybe the fire crackling had played tricks on my ears. I went to bed. The next morning, I walked around the cabin, looking for tracks. The ground was damp from the night's dew, and sure enough, there were footprints. Human footprints. They led from the tree line, circled the cabin once, and stopped near the back wall. I tried to tell myself it was old tracks. Maybe the owner had been here recently, but they weren't old. The edges were sharp, fresh. Someone had been outside my cabin last night, just standing there. I thought about leaving, but I had paid for the whole week, and I didn't want to overreact. Maybe a hiker had gotten lost. Maybe it was nothing. The third night, I locked the doors and windows. I kept the fire low. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they didn't stop at the back of the cabin. They moved around, pausing near the windows near the front door. I didn't move. I barely breathed. My heart pounded so hard I thought whoever was outside might hear it. Then I heard the doorknob rattle. A slow testing turn. Locked. Thank God. I grabbed the hunting knife I had brought with me and sat on the floor, back against the wall, staring at the door. The footsteps moved away, disappearing into the trees. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I made my decision. I was leaving. I packed up quickly and went outside to load my truck. That's when I saw it. In the dirt, right outside my bedroom window, were words, etched carefully into the ground with a stick or a knife. I see you. I drove out of there so fast I almost wrecked my truck on the dirt road. I didn't stop until I was back in town. I went straight to the small sheriff's office and told them everything. The deputy listened, nodding, then sighed. "You're not the first," he said. Apparently, people had reported strange things in that area before. Footsteps, noises, things going missing. But they had never caught anyone. I don't know what would have happened if I had stayed. I don't want to know. All I know is that I will never go back to that place. Ever. I had rented the cabin for a week. It was supposed to be a break from everything, the noise, the crowds, the deadlines. I needed silence. I needed the kind of quiet that settles in your bones, the kind that only exists miles away from the nearest road, where the only sound is the wind moving through the trees. The cabin itself was nothing fancy. A single-story wooden structure with a slanted metal roof, nestled deep in the forest. No running water, just a well outside. No electricity, just an old wood stove and a few gas lanterns. I didn't mind. I wanted to unplug, to get away from everything that made me feel like my life wasn't my own. The drive there had been long, winding through back roads and dirt paths until my tires crunched over gravel in front of the cabin. There was no cell service, no way to call anyone if something went wrong. But that was the point. I wanted solitude, and I had it. The first day was peaceful. I unpacked, brought in firewood from the pile outside, and set up my sleeping bag on the old mattress. I had enough canned food to last the week, a hunting knife strapped to my belt just in case, and a small battery-powered radio that barely picked up a station. It was exactly what I needed. But that night, something felt off. It wasn't anything obvious. There were no strange sounds, no eerie feelings of being watched. Just a subtle unease that settled in my gut as I lay in bed, staring up at the dark wooden ceiling. Maybe it was the silence. Not the peaceful kind I had wanted, but the kind that felt heavy, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I fell asleep eventually, but I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. My body was stiff, my skin cold with sweat. I had no idea what had woken me up, but my ears strained in the dark, listening. Nothing, just the wind outside, rustling through the trees, the creak of the old wooden walls settling. Then something else, a soft crunch, a sound so faint I might have imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. Something had moved outside. I sat up slowly, reaching for my flashlight. I pointed it toward the window, but the curtains were drawn. For a few moments, I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then another sound, closer this time, a deliberate, slow step on the gravel outside. I swallowed, my fingers tightening around the flashlight. There was no reason for anyone to be here. The nearest town was nearly an hour away, and I hadn't seen another car or person on my way in. I told myself it could be an animal, a deer maybe, but I had been in the woods enough times to know what a deer sounded like. This wasn't that. I stood up as quietly as I could and moved toward the door. I pressed my ear against it, listening. The wind had picked up, but beneath it, I swore I could hear breathing. Slow, measured. Someone was out there. I took a step back, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My knife was on the small wooden table near the bed. I grabbed it, gripping the handle tightly. My mind raced. Should I open the door? Call out? But there was no one to call. No signal, no neighbors. If something happened, I was on my own. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the sound was gone. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting, listening, but I heard nothing else. Finally, I forced myself to lie back down, knife still in my hand. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it was restless. The next morning, I stepped outside, blinking against the light. The air was cool, the smell of damp earth thick around me. I walked around the cabin slowly, looking for tracks, and I found them. Footprints. Not animal tracks, not the random scatter of a wandering deer or bear. These were human, and they weren't mine. They led from the tree line to the side of the cabin, stopping just below my window. The sight of them made my skin crawl. Someone had been standing there, watching me. I looked around, scanning the trees, but whoever had been there was long gone. I thought about packing up right then and there, but something stubborn in me resisted. This was my week of solitude. I wasn't going to let some creep ruin it. I had my knife and I wasn't helpless. Maybe it had just been some drunk hunter who got lost, someone who realized their mistake and left. Still, I kept my knife on me the entire day. That night, I made sure the door was locked tight. I dragged a chair in front of it just in case. I kept my flashlight close, my knife closer. The radio crackled softly, some distant station playing static-filled country music. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. My body was tense, my ears alert to every creak, every shift in the wind. Hours passed, and just as I started to drift off, I heard it again. The crunch of gravel, the slow, deliberate steps. Closer, closer. I didn't move, didn't breathe. A shadow passed across the curtain. My blood ran cold. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They weren't just passing through. They had come back. I gripped my knife so hard my fingers ached. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Then, a soft, quiet sound. Metal scraping against metal. The doorknob. They were trying to get in. I sat up fast, knocking over the radio. The sound cut off, the silence swallowing me whole. The scraping stopped. Then a long pause, a breath, and the footsteps retreated, disappearing into the night. I didn't sleep. I sat there in the dark, knife in hand, until the first light of dawn crept through the trees. When I finally found the courage to open the door, my stomach twisted. More footprints, more than before. A set leading away, but also a second pair, leading toward the back of the cabin. I followed them, my pulse pounding. They led into the woods, vanishing among the undergrowth. Whoever had been out there had circled my cabin, watching from all sides. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed my bag, my knife, my keys, and I left. The drive back felt longer than before, every shadow between the trees making my skin crawl. I don't know who was out there. I don't want to know. But sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still hear it. The slow crunch of footsteps in the dark. The quiet breath of someone standing just outside the door, watching, waiting. I don't know what made me think a weekend alone in the woods was a good idea. Maybe I just wanted to clear my head. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't afraid of being alone. Whatever the reason, I booked a small off-grid cabin deep in the mountains. No electricity, no cell service, just me and the wilderness. The drive up was rough. The roads turned from asphalt to gravel, then to dirt, and finally to something that barely qualified as a road at all. It was more of a path, really winding up through the trees, the kind of road that made you nervous about getting stuck. The kind that looked untouched for months. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was already hanging low in the sky, spilling golden light through the branches. The cabin itself was small, just one room with a bed, a wood stove, and a small kitchen area. There was an old wooden table, a few chairs, and a shelf lined with canned food left behind by past visitors. The bathroom was an outhouse a short walk away. No running water, no lights except for the lanterns provided. It felt isolated, which was exactly what I wanted, or at least what I thought I wanted. That first night, I sat outside on the small porch, listening to the forest. The air was cool, crisp, and clean, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves, the occasional crack of a branch, and the distant hoot of an owl. It was peaceful, but even then, I felt something, a sort of pressure in the air. Not a noise, not a movement, just something, like the woods were holding their breath. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I was used to the noise of the city. Out here, silence felt unnatural. I turned in early, locked the door, and crawled into bed. The cabin was colder than I expected. Even with the thick blankets, I felt a deep chill settle in my bones. The kind of cold that doesn't go away no matter how long you lay there. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, listening to the wind outside. Then, just as I started to drift off, I heard it. A noise. Soft, distant. At first, I thought it was the wind whistling through the trees, but it was too rhythmic, too steady. It sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching through the undergrowth. I held my breath, straining to hear. The sound continued, growing closer. Then it stopped. Silence. I told myself it was an animal. A deer, maybe, but something about the way it moved, the measured pace, the way it stopped so suddenly, felt off. I stayed in bed, forcing myself to breathe slowly, forcing myself to believe I was alone. Morning came, and I stepped outside to look around. The forest was quiet, the ground undisturbed. No footprints, no broken branches. Nothing, just my paranoia. I shook it off and spent the day exploring. I hiked a few miles up a nearby ridge, taking in the endless stretch of trees, the sharp bite of mountain air. It was beautiful. Still, that feeling lingered, that pressure in the air, like I was being watched. I returned to the cabin before sunset, not wanting to be out there in the dark. I cooked a simple meal on the old propane stove and sat at the table, eating in silence. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. The loneliness was starting to sink in. Then, just as I was finishing my meal, I heard something, a noise just outside the cabin, a soft shuffle, then another. I froze, staring at the door. The sound moved, circling around the cabin. Slow, steady. I set my fork down, heart pounding in my chest. The steps were too heavy for an animal, too deliberate. I crept to the window, trying to see outside. Darkness pressed against the glass. My lantern cast too much of a glare, making it impossible to see. I reached out and turned it off. For a moment, there was nothing, just pitch black night, the distant hum of the wind. Then movement, a figure, barely visible in the moonlight, standing just beyond the tree line. My stomach turned to ice. It was human, but I couldn't make out any details. Just a dark shape standing there watching. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. Who the hell would be out here? This cabin was miles from anything. No nearby trails, no campsites. Just dense, endless forest. I grabbed the old hunting knife I'd packed, just in case, and stood there, gripping it so tight my knuckles ached. Minutes passed, then an hour. I didn't hear anything else, didn't see anything. Eventually, exhaustion won. I didn't want to sleep, but my body had other plans. I locked the door, checked it twice, then climbed into bed, keeping the knife close. The night passed in a blur of uneasy sleep. I dreamt of dark shapes moving through the trees, of something breathing just outside my window. When morning came, I was relieved to see sunlight spilling through the cracks in the cabin walls. I told myself it was my imagination, just nerves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to leave. I packed my things quickly, shoving them into my bag. As I stepped outside, something caught my eye. Footprints, large, heavy prints in the dirt, circling the cabin. They weren't mine. My stomach twisted. I glanced around, scanning the tree line. Nothing, just the stillness of the woods. But someone had been here. Someone had walked around my cabin in the middle of the night, watching. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed my keys, threw my bag into the truck, and started the engine. As I backed down the narrow dirt path, I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see something step out of the trees. But I didn't. The road stretched empty behind me, the cabin shrinking into the distance. I didn't stop until I hit pavement, until I was miles away from those woods. I don't know who or what was out there that night. I don't want to know, but I'll never go back. Some places aren't meant to be visited alone. I needed to get away for a while. Life had been nothing but noise, stress, and people who all wanted something from me. A weekend alone in a cabin deep in the woods sounded like the perfect way to clear my head. No service, no distractions, just silence and nature. The drive out was long, winding, and empty. I had rented the cabin online, and the owner had given me directions since GPS wouldn't work that far out. The last stretch of road was a dirt path, barely wide enough for my car, with trees pressing in from both sides. It was the kind of place where if something happened, no one would find out for days. When I finally reached the cabin, it was smaller than I expected. One story, a single window facing the front, and a porch with an old wooden chair that rocked slightly in the breeze. The trees loomed tall, their bare branches reaching toward a sky that had started turning gray with the promise of rain. Inside, the cabin smelled like old wood and dust. There was a small kitchen, a single bed pushed against the wall, and a fireplace with a neat stack of logs beside it. I dropped my bag, stretched my legs, and lit a fire. The warmth felt good against the chill creeping in from outside. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural. The first night was uneventful. I made a simple meal, read a few pages from a book I had brought, and let the fire lull me to sleep. But something woke me in the middle of the night. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it, something moving outside. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching the dry leaves just beyond the cabin walls. I held my breath, listening. The steps stopped. I waited, staring at the ceiling, my ears straining in the silence. After what felt like an eternity, I convinced myself it had been a deer or some other animal. The woods were full of them, after all. Still, I had a hard time falling back asleep. The next morning, I found something strange. Near the cabin, about 20 feet from the front porch, the leaves and dirt had been disturbed, like someone had been standing there for a long time. The odd thing was, there were no tracks leading to or away from that spot, just a patch of ground where the earth had been unsettled. I shook it off, trying not to let my imagination get the better of me. I spent the day exploring the area, walking through the dense forest, breathing in the fresh air. But something felt off. No birds, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just silence. I told myself I was being paranoid. That night, I made sure to lock the door and stoke the fire before going to bed. But I woke up again. This time it was different. The footsteps were back, but closer, right outside the cabin. I didn't move. I just listened. The sound of breathing, deep, slow, deliberate. Not an animal, person. I felt frozen in place, heart pounding. The breathing went on for what felt like forever. Then, the sound of fingers, bare skin, dragging along the wooden walls of the cabin. A slow, scraping noise that sent a shiver down my spine. Then silence. I don't know how long I stayed like that, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to move. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, morning light was filtering through the window. I checked outside.
No footprints.
No signs that anyone had been there, but I knew what I heard. The next night, I kept the fire going longer, hoping the light would keep whatever was out there away. I sat in the chair, staring at the door, waiting. Hours passed, and then, just as I started to think maybe it was all in my head, something heavy pressed against the cabin door. The wood creaked under the weight. Then a single, slow knock. I didn't move. The knock came again. Not urgent, not angry, just patient. I grabbed the fireplace poker, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. The knock came one last time, and then, just like before, silence. I didn't sleep. I sat in that chair, the fire slowly dying, gripping the poker until morning. By daylight, I had made up my mind I was leaving. I packed my bag, barely ate, and stepped outside. The woods felt different. The air was thick, heavy, like the trees were watching me. I walked to my car, heart pounding, feeling like I was being watched. I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors before starting the engine. As I pulled away, I saw something in the rearview mirror. Standing in the trees, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure. No details, no face, just the outline of a person. Watching, not moving. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just drove. The cabin disappeared behind me, swallowed by the trees, and I never went back. I don't know who or what was out there, but I know one thing for sure. I wasn't alone. I drove up the winding dirt road, my headlights cutting through the thick trees pressing in from both sides. The sky was dark, and the deeper I got into the forest, the less of it I could see. It felt like the world was shrinking, closing in around me. The rental cabin was deep in the woods, far from town, exactly what I had wanted when I booked it. Peace, quiet, isolation. The road was rough, the gravel crunching under my tires, and every bump jolted my spine. I had checked the directions twice. No cell service out here. The last time I got a signal was nearly 30 minutes ago. It didn't bother me. If anything, I liked the idea of being unreachable. No emails, no calls, just me, the trees, and silence. The cabin appeared suddenly at the end of the road. A squat, wooden structure, tucked between thick pines and half hidden in the shadows. There was no driveway, just a patch of dirt and dead leaves in front of the porch. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the ticking sound of the cooling motor. No sounds of civilization, just the distant hum of insects and the occasional rustle of wind through the branches. That I grabbed my bag and got out, my boots crunching against the ground. The air was sharp with the scent of damp wood and earth. The porch creaked under my weight as I stepped up and unlocked the door. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the smell of old wood and dust. The place was basic, just a single room with a bed, a tiny kitchen, and a fireplace. A door led to a small bathroom. No TV, no internet. Just what I needed. I set my bag down and checked the place out. Everything was as described in the listing. The bed was covered in a rough wool blanket. The kitchen had an old gas stove and a mini fridge that hummed loudly. The single window on the far wall looked out into the trees. No curtains, just a pane of glass reflecting the darkness outside. I flicked the light switch. The bulbs buzzed weakly, barely lighting the room. The generator must have been old. I made a mental note to check the fuel level in the morning. After unpacking, I stepped outside onto the porch. The forest was black beyond the reach of the porch light. No moon tonight, just a heavy blanket of clouds covering the sky. The wind had died down. The silence was thick, pressing in like a weight on my chest. I should have felt relaxed. Instead, there was something off, a feeling in the back of my mind. A wrongness I couldn't explain. Maybe it was just the quiet. I wasn't used to it. Living in the city, there was always noise. Cars, voices, the distant hum of life. Out here, there was nothing. Just me and the dark. I shook it off and went inside, locking the door behind me. The lock was an old deadbolt, solid but worn. I turned it twice, testing it. Secure. The night dragged on. I read for a bit, but my eyes kept drifting back to the window. Every time I glanced up, I expected to see something looking in. Just my own paranoia. The brain plays tricks in places like this. At some point, I fell asleep. The cabin settled around me, creaking softly as the wood cooled. I woke up suddenly. No sound, no dream, just a jolt of awareness. The kind where something feels wrong before you even know what it is. I stayed still, listening. The fridge hummed. The wind had picked up again, whispering through the trees. But there was something else. A noise just at the edge of hearing. A soft shuffle. Something outside. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. The window was just across the room, but from where I lay, I couldn't see anything past the reflection of the dim light. I reached for my phone, but I already knew no service. The sound came again, closer, a dry scrape against the wooden porch. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move. The floor was cold under my feet as I crept toward the window. My breath held tight in my chest. My hand trembled as I reached for the light switch. Click. The bulb flickered out. Darkness swallowed the cabin. I froze. The sound outside stopped. Silence stretched long and thin. Then a single deliberate knock on the door. Not an accident. Not the wind. Something was out there. I backed away, my breathing shallow. My brain screamed for an explanation. A lost hiker? A ranger? But no one should be out here this late. The nearest town was miles away. I waited. No more knocks. Just heavy silence pressing in from all sides. Then, faintly, from the other side of the door, a breath. Slow, deep, deliberate. I grabbed the only weapon I had, an old hunting knife from my bag. My fingers were slick with sweat. I stood in the dark, listening, waiting. Minutes passed. The sound never came again. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move. I reached for my flashlight, clicked it on. The beam shook as I pointed it at the door. No movement. I edged closer, barely breathing, and pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing, just the wind. I turned the lock as quietly as I could, then yanked the door open fast, shining my light out onto the porch. Empty. No footprints. No sign anyone had been there. I stepped out, scanning the trees, my pulse hammering. The forest stood still, the shadows thick and unmoving. I should have left right then, packed my bag, jumped in the car, and driven all night until I hit town. But I didn't. I told myself it was my imagination, the isolation messing with me, the way the brain fills in gaps when it's too quiet. I went back inside, locked the door, and didn't sleep. Morning came slow. I sat in the chair by the window, staring out at the trees, my knife still clutched tight in my hand. The night felt like a bad dream, but I knew better. I packed my things. I didn't check out, didn't leave a note. Just got in my car and drove, watching the trees in my rearview mirror, waiting for something to move. I didn't stop until I hit the highway. I'll never go back there. Never rent another isolated cabin. Never trust the quiet again. Because I know, without a doubt, that I wasn't alone that night. I never liked the idea of being alone in the woods. Something about the silence, the isolation, always unsettled me. But after months of work stress and city noise, I convinced myself a weekend at a remote cabin would be the reset I needed. I found the place online. The pictures showed a simple wooden cabin tucked between thick trees, perched near a lake. It looked peaceful. No neighbors for miles, just me and nature. The listing promised a stocked kitchen, a fireplace, and no Wi-Fi, exactly what I was looking for. The owner, an old man named Harris, gave me the details over email. He'd leave the keys under a rock by the porch. The drive out was long, the road narrowing the farther I went. Asphalt turned to gravel, then dirt, winding through dense forest. It was late afternoon when I arrived. The cabin looked just like the pictures. Rustic, quiet, surrounded by nothing but trees. I parked and stepped out. The air was crisp, the smell of pine heavy. No distant hum of traffic, no voices, just the occasional rustling of leaves. I grabbed my bags and found the key under the rock as promised. The door groaned as I pushed it open. Inside was small but cozy. A fireplace, a worn-out couch, a tiny kitchen with wooden cabinets. The back door led to a porch overlooking the lake, its surface calm and glassy. I unpacked, made a quick dinner, then sat by the fire with a book. By the time I checked my phone, I had no signal. Not surprising. I told myself it was fine. I came here to disconnect. That first night, I woke up to a sound outside, a faint crunching, like footsteps on dried leaves. I held my breath, listening. Then silence. Probably an animal, I thought. I wasn't used to the sounds of the woods. Morning came and I shook it off. I spent the day exploring, walking along the lake's edge, enjoying the quiet. By late afternoon, I was back on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. That's when I noticed something odd. The rock where I had found the key was moved, just slightly but enough for me to notice. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember if I had accidentally kicked it. Maybe I did. I shook it off and went inside. That night, I locked the doors. As I lay in bed, I listened to the woods. It was too quiet. Then, just past midnight, I heard it again. The same soft crunching outside. I sat up, heart pounding. It wasn't steady like an animal moving. Stopped, then started again, closer. I reached for the flashlight beside my bed, debating whether to look out the window. My gut told me not to. Instead, I waited. After a few minutes, the sound stopped. Morning came, and I stepped outside, scanning the ground. Nothing unusual.
No footprints.
Just the wind stirring the trees. Maybe I was imagining things. I spent the day trying to distract myself. Reading, chopping wood, anything to keep busy. That evening, I double-checked the locks. As I stood by the front door, I felt a strange urge to check under the rock. The key was there, but something else caught my eye. The dirt around the rock was disturbed, like it had been moved again. My stomach turned. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me tense. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. But this time, it wasn't footsteps. It was breathing, just outside the window. A slow, steady inhale, exhale. I gripped the blanket, frozen. The breathing stayed there for what felt like forever. Then a faint tapping on the glass. Slow, deliberate. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The tapping stopped. The breathing faded. Morning came and I threw my things into my bag. I wasn't staying another night. I stepped outside, scanning the trees. The forest was empty, the lake still. But as I walked toward my car, something on the ground caught my eye. Footprints, human footprints, leading from the woods to my window. My chest tightened. I turned, scanning the tree line, my pulse hammering. There was no one there, just the endless woods stretching into the distance. I got in my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I backed out, I glanced at the cabin one last time. The curtains in the window were open. I was sure I had closed them. And behind the glass, barely visible in the morning light, a handprint. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away. I never contacted Harris, never told anyone what happened. I don't know who or what was out there, but I know one thing for sure. I wasn't alone in that cabin. I needed a break. Work was burning me out, and the city was starting to feel like a cage. The noise, the people, the lights, everything about it was too much. I needed silence, real silence. Not just the absence of people, but the kind where you hear nothing but the wind through the trees. I found a cabin on some rental site, way out in the woods, miles from anything. It was old but looked sturdy, sitting alone at the end of a dirt road. The description promised solitude, and that was exactly what I wanted. The drive was long, hours of empty roads, then a rough stretch of gravel that kicked up dust so thick I could barely see. By the time I pulled up to the cabin, the sun was low in the sky, turning the trees into black silhouettes against the orange light. The place was smaller than I expected. Just one floor, a slanted roof, and dark wooden walls that had turned almost gray with age. The front porch sagged a little, and the windows were dark like they were watching me. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening. Nothing. No cars, no voices. Just the whisper of wind and the occasional creak of tree branches rubbing against each other. Perfect. Inside, it smelled like wood and dust, like no one had been there in a long time. The furniture was simple. An old couch, a wooden table, a couple of chairs. The kitchen had a gas stove, a fridge that rattled when I turned it on, and a sink with a pump handle instead of regular faucets. There was a single bedroom with a narrow bed and a dresser, and a bathroom with an old clawfoot tub. It was exactly what I needed. Just me, the woods, and quiet. The first night was peaceful. I made a quick dinner, read a little by the dim light of a lantern, and fell asleep to the sound of crickets outside. No traffic, no sirens, no neighbors, just stillness. The next morning, I decided to explore a bit. The woods stretched out in all directions, dense and dark even in daylight. There was a narrow trail behind the cabin, almost overgrown but still walkable. I followed it for a while, stepping over fallen branches and ducking under low-hanging limbs. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots. After about an hour, I came across something strange. A clearing with an old fire pit in the center. Stones were arranged in a perfect circle, and the ashes inside looked fresh, like someone had been there recently. That was odd. As far as I knew, no one lived anywhere near here. I hadn't seen any other cabins or signs of people on my way in. I looked around, but there was nothing else. No footprints, no trash, just the fire pit and the silence pressing in around me. Something about it made me uneasy, so I turned back toward the cabin, walking a little faster than before. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The wind had picked up, making the trees groan and shift outside. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and told myself I was being paranoid. I was alone. That's what I wanted, right? Sometime after midnight, I woke up. It wasn't a sound that woke me, more like the lack of one. The wind had stopped, and the forest outside was completely silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just dead, heavy quiet. I lay there, heart pounding, trying to listen. Then, somewhere outside, I heard a twig snap. It was close. I sat up slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. The window over the bed faced the trees, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. I strained my ears, waiting. Another sound, soft, deliberate steps moving around the side of the cabin. I reached for my phone, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I cursed under my breath and slid out of bed as quietly as I could, moving toward the front door. The only weapon I had was a heavy flashlight, so I gripped it tight and pressed my back against the wall. The footsteps stopped. For a long time, there was nothing, just silence stretching on until I started to wonder if I'd imagined it. Then, a new sound. Not footsteps this time. Something scraping against the wood of the porch. My breath caught in my throat. Someone or something was out there. I could feel it. I didn't move. I just stood there, barely breathing, waiting for whatever was outside to make the next move. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. The night stayed silent. I waited for what felt like hours before finally forcing myself to move. I checked the windows. Nothing. I pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. By the time dawn broke, I was still awake, still gripping the flashlight with white knuckles. When the sun finally rose high enough to push the shadows back, I forced myself to open the door. The porch was empty, but the wood near the steps was scratched deep, like something had dragged sharp nails or a knife across it. I looked around, scanning the trees, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no signs of anyone. I packed my things in record time. Whatever had been out there, I wasn't sticking around to find out what it wanted. I tossed everything into the car, started the engine, and peeled out of there, my heart only settling once I was miles away. I don't know what was out there that night. Maybe it was just an animal, maybe a drifter passing through, or maybe it was something worse, something that knew I was alone and wanted me to stay that way. I don't think I'll ever go back to find out. I had been looking forward to this trip for months, a solo getaway to clear my head, deep in the woods, away from work, people, and everything else that drained me. I found a secluded cabin online, cheap and barely advertised, which was perfect. It was deep in the forests of Montana, far from the tourist-heavy areas. The owner had warned me about the lack of cell service and electricity, but that was part of the appeal. I needed silence, real silence, the kind you only get when you're completely alone. The drive out took nearly 6 hours from the nearest town. The road leading up to the cabin was a winding dirt path barely wide enough for my truck. The deeper I went, the thicker the trees became, By the time I reached the cabin, the sky had started to darken, casting long shadows between the pines. The cabin itself was smaller than I had expected, but it looked sturdy. A simple wooden structure with a porch, a single chimney, and a shed out back. Inside, it was basic: a bed, a wood stove, a small kitchen with a propane burner, and a few shelves lined with canned goods. There was a well outside for water, and an outhouse a few yards away. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt the weight of the quiet. No distant traffic, no hum of electricity, just the wind through the trees. I dropped my bags and got to work, lighting the lanterns and setting up the wood stove. The first night was peaceful. I sat on the porch, listening to the wind. Occasionally, I'd hear a distant rustling in the underbrush, probably deer or raccoons. Before heading inside, I double-checked that my truck was locked. There was no reason to be paranoid, but old habits stuck with me. The second day, I explored the surrounding woods. The terrain was rough, uneven with deep pockets of moss and exposed roots. I found a narrow trail behind the cabin, barely visible beneath the leaves. It felt old, unused. I followed it for about an hour before deciding to turn back. The deeper I went, the heavier the air felt, like I was being watched. I chalked it up to being alone in an unfamiliar place. That night, I woke up to the sound of something moving outside. I listened, heart pounding, waiting for it to stop. Didn't. It was slow, deliberate. Footsteps. Not an animal, not the wind. I stayed in bed, barely breathing. After what felt like an eternity, they faded away. I convinced myself it had to be my imagination. The mind plays tricks in the dark. On the third day, I found footprints near the cabin. Human footprints. The dirt around the well had been disturbed, the prints leading off into the woods. Someone had been here watching. I told myself it could have been old, maybe a hunter passing through. But I knew better. That night, I barricaded the door with a chair. It wasn't much, but it made me feel better. I kept my hatchet next to my bed. Sleep didn't come easy. I woke up to the sound of the doorknob rattling. My blood turned to ice. Someone was trying to get in. The chair against the door creaked as pressure was applied from the other side. I sat up, gripping the hatchet, too afraid to move. The rattling stopped. Silence. Then, the sound of footsteps retreating, slow and deliberate, back into the woods. I barely slept. As soon as the sun came up, I packed my things. I was done. I didn't care if I had paid for a full week. I wasn't staying another night. I rushed to my truck, tossing my bag into the passenger seat. The engine turned over, and I pulled out onto the dirt road, leaving the cabin behind. A few miles down the road, I spotted something in my rearview mirror, a figure standing at the tree line, half hidden in the shadows. Watching, I didn't slow down. I drove straight back to town, booked a motel for the night, and tried to convince myself that I had imagined it. But I knew better. Someone had been out there. Someone had been watching me. And if I had stayed one more night, I don't think I would have made it out. I should have never gone to that cabin. The idea had sounded good at first. A break from everything, some peace and quiet away from work and the city. I had rented it for a full week, deep in the woods, far from people, far from noise. The listing said it was an old hunting cabin, isolated, no neighbors, just trees for miles. That was what I wanted, or at least I thought I did. The drive out took longer than expected. The last hour was spent on a narrow dirt road, barely wide enough for my car. Trees pressed in on both sides, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The road was bumpy, uneven, full of dips and loose gravel. I had to slow down to avoid wrecking my suspension. The only sound was the crunch of tires on dirt and the occasional rustling of leaves when the wind picked up. By the time I arrived, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. The cabin itself was small, old but sturdy, built from thick logs that had darkened with age. A single window faced the front, and a tiny porch sagged slightly at the corners. The roof was slanted, patched in places with metal sheets, and the whole thing smelled like damp wood and earth. There was no electricity. The only light inside came from a few old oil lamps, their glass dirty and smudged. A wood stove stood in the corner, cold and lifeless, with a pile of chopped logs stacked neatly beside it. There was a small table, 2 chairs, a narrow cot pushed up against the far wall. Simple, functional. I dropped my bag on the floor inside. It was just me and the woods. The first night was uneventful. I made a fire in the stove, cooked some canned soup, then sat on the porch and listened to the sounds of the forest. It was quiet, except for the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. It felt peaceful, almost comforting. Then the second night came. I woke up to a noise, a low, steady tapping. At first, I thought it was the wind knocking a branch against the cabin, but as I lay there, I realized it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I sat up in the cot, heart pounding. The sound was coming from the front door. I grabbed my flashlight and crept across the cabin, my breath shallow. The tapping stopped. I stood there for a long time, listening. Nothing, just the wind through the trees. I convinced myself it had been my imagination, some trick of the night. The next morning, I found footprints outside the cabin. They weren't mine. They were fresh, leading from the trees to the porch and then back into the woods. Bare feet. I told myself it had to be an animal. Maybe a bear, maybe some stray dog. I ignored the shape of the prints, the way they looked disturbingly human. I forced myself to believe it was nothing, but I couldn't ignore the feeling. That night, I locked the door. I wedged a chair under the handle. I kept my flashlight and a knife within reach. The tapping returned. Slow, patient. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. It stopped after a few minutes, but I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I found something on the porch. A dead rabbit, its throat cut clean, its body placed neatly in front of the door. That was it. That was the moment I knew I had made a mistake coming here. I packed my bag. I was leaving, but when I got to my car, the tires were slashed. Not just punctured, shredded. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't alone. Someone was out here with me. I rushed back into the cabin, bolted the door, checked the windows. I had no signal on my phone, no way to call for help. I was trapped. I stayed inside for the rest of the day, heart hammering at every sound. The sun dipped lower, the shadows stretched longer. I tried to think, tried to come up with a plan. Then night fell, and the tapping started again. This time, it wasn't just the door. It was the window too, light, almost playful, like whoever was out there was enjoying this. I held my breath, clutching the knife so tightly my knuckles ached. I stayed still, listening. Then I heard footsteps, slow, circling the cabin. I waited, sweat dripping down my back. The footsteps stopped. The silence stretched on, thick as fog. Then the door handle rattled. I nearly dropped the knife. The chair wedged under the handle creaked. The door groaned slightly in its frame. I forced myself to stay quiet. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I didn't move for the rest of the night. When the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I forced myself to look outside. Nothing. But when I stepped onto the porch, I saw something new. A single word, carved into the wood just beside the door. Run. I did. I grabbed my bag and ran. I didn't care about the car. I didn't care about anything except getting away. I ran through the trees, following the dirt road, pushing forward even when my lungs burned and my legs screamed. I don't know how long I ran. Hours. Maybe more. I didn't stop until I saw another car. A truck driving toward me. The driver was an old man. I must have looked like a lunatic. Wild-eyed, covered in dirt and sweat. I told him everything, breathless, desperate. He listened. Then he frowned. That cabin, he said. No one's rented that place in years. He drove me back to town. I didn't look back. I still don't know who was out there, and I don't want to know. I didn't plan on staying at the cabin for long. Just a weekend. Get some time away from the city, clear my head, enjoy the silence. It belonged to an old friend of mine, a guy I hadn't seen in years. He was overseas now, told me I could use it whenever I wanted. Seemed perfect. The drive up was easy enough, mostly winding roads through the woods. No traffic. Barely saw another car after I got off the highway. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the trees. It was one of those places that felt stuck in time. Just a simple wooden structure with a porch, a stone chimney, and a single window facing the gravel driveway. There was a shed out back, and beyond that, nothing but forest stretching for miles. Inside, the place was exactly what I expected. Rustic, a little dusty, but comfortable. A single bed against the wall, a small table with 2 chairs, a wood stove, and a kitchen with just the basics. No electricity, just a few gas lamps and a battery-powered radio. I checked my phone, no signal. That was fine. That was the point. I spent the first couple of hours getting settled. Unpacked my bag, lit a few lamps, cracked open a beer. The quiet was nice. No sirens, no honking, no voices from the apartment next door. Just the sound of the wind moving through the trees and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. By nightfall, it got cold fast. I threw some logs into the stove and got a fire going. The warmth spread through the cabin, the flames crackling softly. I ate a quick meal, some canned beans and bread, then sat by the stove, letting the heat sink into my bones. That's when I heard it. It wasn't loud, not at first. Just a soft rustling sound coming from outside. I figured it was the wind or maybe an animal moving through the brush. But then it happened again, closer this time. A steady, deliberate crunch of leaves and twigs underfoot. I stood up, heart suddenly pounding. The cabin had no curtains, and the only window faced the driveway. I turned down the lamp and peered outside. Nothing, just darkness and trees swaying in the wind. I told myself it was nothing, forced myself to sit back down. The night dragged on. Every now and then, I'd hear something outside. A shuffle, a crack, a breath of movement just beyond the walls. At one point, it sounded like someone was circling the cabin, stepping carefully, almost testing the ground. I thought about opening the door, stepping out with a flashlight, but something held me back. Instead, I grabbed the hunting knife my friend had left behind, just in case. Eventually, exhaustion won out. I locked the door, set the knife beside my bed, and pulled the covers over me. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept waking up, convinced I'd heard something. But every time I listened, there was only silence. The next morning, everything felt normal again. Sunlight streamed through the trees, the air was crisp, and the fear from the night before felt stupid. Just my mind playing tricks on me. I stepped outside, stretching, breathing in the fresh air. Then I saw the footprints. They weren't mine. They weren't from any animal I could think of. They were human, barefoot, leading from the tree line to the cabin, stopping just at the porch before turning back the way they came. I stood there, staring at them, my stomach twisting. I hadn't imagined it. Someone had been out there last night, standing just feet away from where I slept. I forced myself to think rationally. Maybe some hiker got lost, maybe they were just passing through. But why come so close? Why stop at the cabin and then leave? And why barefoot? I decided I'd had enough. I packed my bag, cleaned up, made sure I wasn't leaving anything behind. The unease stuck with me, though a weight in my chest I couldn't shake. Just as I was about to get in my car, I noticed something else. A small pile of rocks carefully stacked, right beside the porch steps, that hadn't been there when I arrived. I didn't stay to think about it. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove, fast. I didn't stop until I hit the main road, and even then, I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the trees, watching me leave. I never went back. My friend asked me about the trip later, and I lied. Told him it was great, exactly what I needed. He offered the cabin again a few months later. I made an excuse. Some things I decided are better left alone.